A unique exploration of ancient Greek legends, stories spanning millennia, is about to unfold. These narratives, cherished for thousands of years, have been tenderly passed through countless generations, much like comforting lullabies. This particular journey promises to delve beyond the surface, inviting a quiet contemplation as the clamor of the modern world recedes. This rendition of myth diverges sharply from the dramatic, action-packed accounts often encountered. Instead, it promises an immersion into the subtle nuances, the tender intricacies, and the serene interludes that punctuate the more monumental occurrences. The experience will guide one through the hallowed depths of ancient caves, allowing the perception of hushed exchanges between divine beings and their mortal counterparts. As the ambient light softens and a gentle, almost imperceptible hum fills the air, the stage is set for an unparalleled voyage into the tranquil realm of Greek mythology. Picture a sanctuary of unparalleled tranquility, a silence so profound that the very pulse of one's own heart might seem like an audible murmur. It is into such an ethereal stillness that this narrative ventures, drawing closer to the concealed grotto of Hypnos, the benevolent deity of slumber. While contemporary thought often perceives sleep as a mere physiological state, the ancient Hellenes possessed a deeper insight. They recognized that a force as potent and universal as sleep, capable of leveling monarchs and paupers, and even halting the most formidable warrior mid-stride, transcended a mere sensation. It had to embody a sentient presence, and that presence was Hypnos. Hypnos' sacred dwelling was said to reside at the very periphery of existence, a liminal space where the brilliance of day imperceptibly yielded to the embrace of night, much like honey softly dissipating into warm, comforting milk. The cave's entrance remained forever untouched by the sun's illuminating rays, and its ancient walls had never reverberated with discordant or jarring noises. According to ancient Greek lore, one might discover this elusive sanctuary by tracing the languid course of the river Lethe, the fabled river of forgetfulness, until its waters progressed with such an astonishing slowness that their movement became almost imperceptible. Drawing nearer to this hallowed site, one's steps instinctively grow hushed and measured. The very atmosphere appears saturated with a profound somnolence, akin to navigating through unseen draperies of the most exquisite silk. Here, poppies flourish in wild abundance, not the vibrant crimson blooms commonly recognized, but ethereal, pale blossoms, their heavy heads swaying gently in a breeze that remains almost imperceptible. The cave's entrance presents itself, not as a jagged, menacing maw, but as a gracefully rounded, inviting aperture, smoothed by the passage of innumerable centuries. Every surface is softly upholstered with verdant moss, and minuscule water droplets descend with such infrequent rhythm that each solitary fall resonates like the far-off chime of a temple bell, heard from an unknown distance. Within, the cavern extends beyond the reach of ordinary sight, not due to immense physical length, but because its very essence induces a delightful heaviness in the observer's eyelids. The subterranean walls arc with an elegant fluidity, seeming to pulse with a gentle, rhythmic cadence. And there, at the serene heart of this tranquil sanctuary, reclines Hypnos himself. Here, the narrative deepens, revealing an intriguing layer of the god's existence. Hypnos was not, in fact, solitary within his cavernous abode. Strewn about him, much like slumbering children during a prolonged bedtime tale, lay his 1,000 progeny. Each of these sons personified a distinct facet of the dream world. Among them was Morpheus, the master of human forms, adept at manifesting as distant loved ones within the tapestry of sleep. Close by, Icolus reposed, whose dominion was the realm of animals, capable of conjuring visions of soaring with eagles or racing alongside wolves beneath the pale moonlight. And then there was Phantasos, arguably the most enigmatic of the siblings, who populated dreams with fantastical, non-existent objects, impossible constructs that, paradoxically, held perfect coherence until the waking world asserted itself. Yet a fascinating revelation awaits. Despite his divine dominion over sleep, Hypnos did not perpetually slumber. On occasion, when the cave's tranquility reached its zenith, he would slowly rise to attend his unique garden of poppies. His movements were fluid and unhurried, as if performed underwater, each gesture seamlessly blending into the next, never a sudden motion that might disrupt the profound stillness. This garden was truly unparalleled. Its poppies grew in orderly, somnolent rows, and when their petals detached, they did not perish. Instead, they merely grew softer, drifting downwards like feathers from a leisurely pillow fight. Hypnos meticulously gathered these ethereal petals into a basket crafted from dreams, reserving them for those nights when the world above was too clamorous, too fraught with anxiety, or too burdened by worry for natural slumber to descend. Indeed, Hypnos held a vocation far more profound than commonly understood. His purpose extended beyond merely inducing weariness. It was to bestow genuine, restorative repose, the kind that mends both the physical form and the troubled spirit. Each evening, as the sun commenced its descent across the world above, he would meticulously ready himself for his sacred duty, much like a master craftsman assembling his instruments. From his cherished basket of dream petals, he would carefully choose the precise ones, tailored to each individual requiring slumber. For a mother burdened by worry, he might select petals imbued with visions of her children, safe and joyful. For an elderly man yearning for his bygone youth, petals that evoked tender recollections of endless summer afternoons. And for a child apprehensive of the encroaching darkness, petals that painted dreams in a comforting, soft, golden glow. Yet, the most extraordinary aspect of Hypnos's power, a feat that even the other Olympian deities regarded with awe, was his singular ability to induce slumber in none other than Zeus himself. Indeed, the sovereign of the gods, the formidable wielder of thunderbolts and master of the heavens, would find his mighty eyes growing heavy when Hypnos deemed it appropriate. This remarkable occurrence is chronicled twice within the ancient narratives. On both occasions, it was Hera, Zeus's formidable consort, who sought Hypnos's assistance. Hera, frequently at odds with her husband's pronouncements, understood the perils of direct confrontation with the king of the gods. Consequently, she would journey to Hypnos's tranquil grotto, politely entreating him to facilitate a brief respite for Zeus. During the initial instance of this audacious act, Hypnos was understandably apprehensive. To lull Zeus into slumber without divine consent was an undertaking fraught with potential peril for any deity. However, Hera offered an irresistible recompense, the hand of one of the Graces in marriage, a prize too magnificent to decline. Thus Hypnos ascended Mount Olympus, gliding through its resplendent marble halls with the ethereal subtlety of mist, and gently exhaled the essence of sleep upon the king of the gods. Zeus succumbed to such profound slumber that he remained utterly oblivious to Hera's subsequent actions, a circumstance likely beneficial for all. Upon awakening and comprehending the deception, his fury was incandescent. He scoured every corner of Olympus for Hypnos, intent on meting out severe retribution. Yet the god of sleep had already shrewdly retreated to his sanctuary, concealing himself within the protective embrace of his mother, Nyx, the primordial goddess of night. Even Zeus harbored a profound reverence for Nyx. Night predated the Olympians, embodying a force more fundamental than their decrees or wrath. Confronted with Hypnos shielded by the very fabric of darkness, Zeus was compelled to relent, and Hypnos remained secure, nestled in the shadows like a child seeking refuge from a tempest beneath a comforting blanket. When Hera again sought his aid, Hypnos exhibited understandable reluctance, referencing the precarious outcome of their previous endeavor. Yet Hera's determination was unwavering. This time, her offering was even more magnificent, a resplendent golden throne, impervious to breakage, accompanied by a footstool meticulously crafted by Hephaestus himself. This divine furniture was so exquisitely fashioned that merely resting upon it was said to bestow profound peace upon any being, whether god or mortal. Thus, Hypnos embarked once more on his hushed pilgrimage to Olympus. Proceeding with heightened caution, he assumed the form of a diminutive bird, settling upon a pine tree branch just beyond Zeus's window. From this vantage, he performed the most ethereal lullaby ever conceived, a melody woven from soft sighs and the whisper of gentle breezes. Under its influence, Zeus's formidable eyelids grew heavy, his powerful head began to nod, and he soon descended into the most profound and serene slumber he had ever known. However, the true profundity of this narrative lies beyond Hera's machinations or Zeus's temporary deception. It underscores the astonishing, undeniable power of rest itself. Even the most formidable entity in the cosmos required the restorative embrace of sleep. A being capable of wielding lightning and commanding earthquakes ultimately had to yield to the subtle, benevolent influence of Hypnos. Within the sanctuary of his cave, Hypnos would occasionally muse upon these extraordinary escapades while nurturing his perpetual garden. While his Olympian peers boasted sagas of epic battles, perilous quests, tumultuous love affairs, and fearsome retributions, Hypnos possessed a distinct, unparalleled gift. His was the ability to bestow tranquility upon any being, in any locale, at any moment. His grotto endured as a timeless haven where anxieties dissipated like sugar in warm water, and worldly troubles receded, appearing insignificant and distant. Mortals fortunate enough to stumble upon this hidden sanctuary, typically those who had lost their way in dense woodlands or strayed too deeply into their own introspections, consistently recounted it as the most profoundly restful place they had ever encountered. They spoke of moss softer than the most luxurious down, of air imbued with the fragrance of lavender and fresh rain, and how merely inhaling within its confines prompted their shoulders to release tension and their minds to achieve a serene stillness. Some ventured that a single hour spent within Hypnos's grotto surpassed the restorative power of an entire week of conventional sleep. Moreover, the dreams granted to its visitors were entirely distinct. These were not the chaotic, perplexing visions of ordinary slumber, but rather lucid, tender narratives, seemingly custom-crafted for each individual, dreams of soaring gracefully over tranquil oceans, of intimate dialogues with departed loved ones, or of wandering through verdant gardens where every blossom resonated with perfect, melodious harmony. As the sojourn to this tranquil cavern approaches its conclusion, one might find themselves contemplating a particular query. In an epoch teeming with deities who demanded fervent adoration and ritualistic immolations, who frequently erupted in fits of pique and instigated conflicts, why did Hypnos appear content to merely inhabit his concealed grotto with serene quietude, desiring nothing beyond the opportunity to grant the world respite? Perhaps his unique tranquility stemmed from an insight that had eluded his more boisterous counterparts, that at times the most profound exertion of influence lies not in overt action, but rather in a steadfast presence, in extending solace without precondition, and in gently reminding all beings, both divine and mortal, that even amidst the most bustling and tumultuous existence, an inviolable sanctuary for peace invariably persists. And it is conceivable that this very lesson could serve as a valuable guide for all as they retreat into their own moments of stillness this evening, musing upon the dreams that might grace them in the tender hours ahead, and the narratives that sleep itself might impart, should one attune their perception sufficiently to discern its whispered sagacity. That elusive sensation, akin to awakening from a vivid dream of a locale that felt utterly tangible, only to find the precise details slipping just beyond conscious recall, a subtle pang of loss, much like attempting to cup and retain water in one's open palms. This precisely encapsulates the sentiment many experience upon their initial encounter with the legend of Atlantis. Yet, this night, let us embark upon a deliberate perambulation through this fabled island, not in the dramatic instant of its submergence beneath the ocean's expanse, but rather as it thrived in its quiet, quotidian rhythms, prior to the unfolding drama, antecedent to the universally remembered catastrophe. The narrative of Atlantis reached posterity through the writings of Plato, an eminent Greek philosopher who lived approximately 2,400 years ago. He did not present it as mere mythological lore. Instead, he framed it as a profound intellectual exercise, an intricate thought experiment veiled within an ancient chronicle. One might envision him seated beneath the dappled shade of an olive tree, engaging his pupils in discourse concerning the essence of ideal societies and the inherent perils of unchecked authority. The golden afternoon light would have gently filtered through the verdant foliage, and somewhere nearby, a fountain's soft gurgle would have accompanied his intricate storytelling. However, let us momentarily depart from the philosophical academy and instead envision ourselves traversing the authentic thoroughfares of Atlantis on an unremarkable Tuesday morning, a time when no extraordinary events transpired, and the populace simply pursued their customary daily routines. The sun, then, would have been pleasantly warm, yet not oppressively hot. A balmy zephyr would have carried the commingled fragrances of blossoming flora and the briny sea. And, in the not-too-distant background, the joyous peals of children's laughter would have punctuated the air as they engaged in their innocent play. The foremost impression gleaned from Atlantis would undoubtedly be the meticulous precision of its layout. The entirety of the insular realm was constructed in a series of impeccable concentric circles, reminiscent of a target meticulously inscribed by an entity possessing boundless patience. At the very nucleus of this design reposed the royal palace, encircled by an initial band of land, followed by a watery channel, then another terrestrial ring, and so forth, extending outwards to the bustling harbor, where vessels from distant corners of the globe gently swayed in the morning's soft currents. These were, however, no ordinary circular formations. Each ring was ingeniously interconnected by a network of bridges and subterranean passages, meticulously carved from both ebony and alabaster stone, thereby creating patterns that, when observed from the elevated vantage points of the city's surrounding hills, resembled colossal checkerboards. The aquatic tunnels themselves were generously proportioned, allowing two ships to navigate past each other with effortless ease, and their interiors were meticulously adorned with brass, which shimmered with a golden luminescence beneath the afternoon sun. Strolling through the outermost ring during the early morning hours, an observer would encounter fishermen diligently preparing their nets, their movements imbued with the slow, practiced rhythm of individuals who had perfected their craft over countless generations. Their maritime vessels were unlike any other known in the ancient world, meticulously fashioned from a unique timber indigenous solely to Atlantis, a wood inherently impervious to salt water and seemingly immune to the ravages of decay or splintering. These fishermen would offer a courteous nod to passers-by, yet they would betray no particular awe at the sight of visitors. After all, when one resides within the most technologically advanced civilization on the planet, sojourners from foreign lands often appear somewhat rudimentary. Not in a derogatory sense, certainly, but rather in a manner akin to how one might regard someone laboriously attempting mathematical calculations with an abacus when a sophisticated calculator is readily available. Their self-assurance was a quiet, ingrained comfort, characteristic of a people who had never experienced the anxieties of scarcity, neither of sustenance nor of secure dwelling. Progressing inwards towards the second concentric ring, one would traverse the initial bridge and enter the vibrant merchant district, where the true marvel of Atlantean ingenuity became strikingly manifest. Here lies a fascinating point of interest. The Atlanteans had successfully engineered solutions to complex challenges that would not be rediscovered or implemented by other civilizations for millennia. They possessed a system of running water in every edifice, not solely for potable consumption, but also providing heated water for luxurious ablutions. Furthermore, they had established an efficient postal network capable of delivering communications to any point on the island within a mere few hours. They even utilized a form of rudimentary elevators, employing an intricate arrangement of counterweights and pulleys that could hoist both individuals and merchandise between different floors with remarkable ease. But hold, for this is the aspect that would truly astonish a contemporary observer. Despite the pervasive presence of such advanced technology, the rhythm of daily existence in Atlantis unfolded at an astonishingly unhurried pace. Individuals did not rush about with an air of urgent purpose. Instead, they ambled leisurely through the expansive thoroughfares, pausing to engage in convivial conversation with neighbors, to scrutinize wares displayed in the bustling marketplace, or simply to recline upon exquisitely carved benches and observe the world's gentle procession. This serene tempo was attributable to a profound insight the Atlanteans had cultivated, an understanding that modern societies continue to strive for, that operational efficiency and profound tranquility could harmoniously coexist. Their sophisticated systems did not precipitate a more frenetic lifestyle. Rather, they fostered a more relaxed and contemplative one. When one is liberated from the daily expenditure of hours on fundamental survival imperatives, ample time becomes available for intellectual pursuits, for creative endeavors, and for the simple, profound act of being fully present within one's own life. Within the vibrant marketplace of the second ring, vendors offered an array of exotic fruits cultivated nowhere else on Earth. There were apples that retained their pristine freshness for months without any sign of spoilage, grapes whose flavor subtly shifted depending on the precise hour of their consumption, and a distinctive type of bread crafted from a unique grain that flourished underwater in the submerged agricultural fields encircling the island. This bread possessed a subtly sweet, nutty essence, and a texture so ethereal it appeared to dissolve upon the tongue like delicate sea foam. The Atlantean agriculturists had mastered the art of collaborating with the ocean's forces rather than contending against them. They had devised an ingenious system of regulated flooding that both enriched their arable land and yielded harvests of extraordinary quality and abundance. During the season of harvest, these fields would be carefully drained, and brigades of laborers would wade through the fertile, rich mud, collecting produce that would not only sustain Atlantis itself, but also supply a significant portion of the wider Mediterranean world. As one proceeded deeper into the island's concentric arrangement, towards the third ring, a passage would be made across one of those truly remarkable bridges. The experience of traversing it felt akin to moving between two distinct realms. The limpid waters below were so exceptionally clear that schools of fish could be distinctly observed, swimming with unhurried grace, their iridescent scales catching the ambient light like a scattering of polished coins. The Atlanteans had selectively bred these aquatic creatures to possess exceptional beauty and a placid disposition, and the practice of feeding them had evolved into a cherished pastime enjoyed by both children and adults alike. The third ring served as the vibrant hub for the island's highly skilled artisans and craftspeople. It was in this sector that the authentic brilliance of Atlantean society became unmistakably apparent. These individuals were not merely engaged in the production of functional articles. Rather, they were artists who, by their very nature, created objects of utility. A seemingly simple water pitcher, for instance, would be sculpted and embellished with such exquisite artistry that it could readily command a place of honor in a museum. Yet it would simultaneously perform its practical function flawlessly, keeping water refreshingly cool even on the most scorching of days. The metalworkers of Atlantis had unearthed orichalcum, a singular metallic element found nowhere else across the globe. It was famously described as possessing a value almost commensurate with gold, yet proving more versatile, exhibiting greater strength than bronze, surpassing silver in aesthetic appeal, and endowed with the extraordinary characteristic of emanating its own soft, inherent luminescence. They judiciously employed this precious material not merely for decorative purposes, but for essential practical applications, such as the construction of water conduits and structural supports, imbuing the entire metropolis with a gentle, ethereal shimmer during the twilight hours. Here's an aspect that might indeed surprise an observer regarding Atlantean society. Despite their considerable affluence and technological prowess, they were not consumed by an insatiable pursuit of luxury for its own intrinsic value. Instead, they appeared to grasp a profound truth, that the ultimate luxury resided in possessing ample time and tranquility to savor life's simpler pleasures. Families would routinely dedicate entire afternoons to their meticulously maintained gardens, not out of a laborious obligation to tend to the botanical specimens, but rather from a genuine desire to witness the organic process of growth and flourishing. Advancing into the innermost rings, one would begin to discern the grand temples and esteemed schools that rendered Atlantis not merely technologically advanced, but profoundly wise. The Atlanteans held a deep reverence for Poseidon, the formidable deity of the sea, yet their places of worship were not the somber, enigmatic structures one might anticipate. Instead, they manifested as expansive, airy edifices where seawater flowed gracefully through carefully designed channels embedded in the flooring, generating a ceaseless, soothing murmur of moving water that seemed to effectively dissipate all forms of apprehension and stress. Their educational institutions were perhaps even more remarkable than their sacred temples. Children were instructed not merely in the acquisition of factual knowledge and practical proficiencies, but critically in the cultivation of clear thought and the art of living a virtuous life. They meticulously studied disciplines such as mathematics and engineering, certainly, but their curriculum also encompassed music and philosophy, agriculture and astronomy. The overarching objective was to cultivate individuals capable of contributing meaningfully to society in a multitude of ways, individuals who possessed an intrinsic understanding of how all the disparate components of civilization intricately interlinked. However, it is at this juncture that the narrative subtly shifts its tonality, much like a perfectly clear summer day can gradually become overcast with clouds. As successive generations unfolded, some among the Atlanteans began to take their impeccably constructed society for granted. The younger populace, who had matured amidst the conveniences of running water and efficient transportation, with an abundance of food and architecturally magnificent buildings, gradually began to perceive these conditions as the inherent, natural order of the world. They started to harbor the conviction that their unparalleled success stemmed from an innate superiority over other peoples, rather than being the culmination of diligent effort, collaborative spirit, and fortuitous circumstances. A faction among them eventually began to reason that if Atlantis so demonstrably surpassed all other realms, then perhaps they were destined to exert dominion over those other realms as well. It was a subtle, incremental evolution in their collective mindset, akin to the imperceptible accumulation of sand against a seawall, gradually altering the very contour of the shoreline. It is here that the narrative recounted by Plato transforms into a potent admonition regarding the perils inherent in unchecked hubris and boundless ambition. The once benevolent Atlanteans began to cast their gaze outward, their minds now preoccupied with strategies of conquest, having forsaken the serene sagacity that had originally served as the bedrock of their magnificent civilization. They embarked upon the construction of formidable warships, abandoning the simpler craft used for fishing, and dedicated their efforts to training legions of soldiers instead of nurturing the minds of philosophers. Their societal worth became measured not by the collective bounty they could cultivate and create, but rather by the spoils they could forcibly wrest from others. This profound alteration in their collective disposition, as chronicled by Plato, was not an abrupt, instantaneous cataclysm. Instead, it unfolded with a slow, insidious progression, akin to a meticulously maintained garden gradually succumbing to wild overgrowth when the tender care of its keeper ceases. One generation exhibited a marginally greater inclination towards belligerence than its predecessors. The subsequent generation became even more deeply entrenched in a conviction of their inherent supremacy. And the generation that followed began to perceive the appropriation of desired resources from others not merely as an acceptable practice, but as an undeniable, inherent prerogative. The pantheon of gods, most notably the sovereign Zeus, observed this disturbing metamorphosis with an escalating sense of disquietude. The Atlanteans were evolving into a manifestation they were never intended to embody, colossal aggressors, perverting their extraordinary endowments to inflict harm rather than to provide succor. It was a spectacle akin to witnessing a cherished offspring mature into a figure of cruelty and self-absorption, utterly shattering the affections of all who had once held them in high esteem. Consequently, within the span of a single day and night, the fabled city of Atlantis was utterly engulfed by the ocean's depths. This cataclysm, according to Plato, was not born of divine wrath, but rather of a profound sorrow, much like the melancholic act of setting aside a beautiful, intricate toy that has been irrevocably broken beyond any hope of mending. The very earth convulsed, the relentless sea surged upwards, and the most advanced civilization the world had ever known simply vanished, as if its existence had been but a fleeting dream. Yet, the truly compelling aspect of this conclusion lies in its deeper philosophical implications. Plato was not, in essence, simply relating a tale of a lost civilization. He was, fundamentally, presenting a narrative steeped in the profound consequences of choices, illustrating how even the most impeccably structured society could face utter ruin if its populace neglected the core principles that had initially fostered its eminence. The authentic Atlantis in Plato's conceptualization was not a tangible geographical location. It represented an aspirational ideal of what human society could achieve if its members collaborated with sagacity and equity. And the genuine tragedy was not its physical submersion into the ocean, but rather its internal transmogrification from a state of sublime beauty into one of profound ugliness. The physical obliteration served merely as the palpable emblem of a spiritual desolation that had already irrevocably occurred. The Atlantis that descended beneath the waves was, in its essence, already a ghost. What the vast ocean ultimately claimed was but an empty husk of what had once been a veritable paradise. As one contemplates the tranquil expanse of water where the legendary Atlantis once proudly stood, one might ponder the enduring lessons this ancient allegory continues to impart. In our contemporary era, blessed with technological marvels that would have appeared as pure magic to our ancient forebears, do we harness these innovations to cultivate greater wisdom and foster peace? Or do they merely serve to amplify distraction and exacerbate conflict? Do we endeavor to construct conduits of understanding between diverse peoples, or do we instead erect formidable barriers? And perhaps, in the gentle, rhythmic lapping of waves upon distant shores, we can still discern a faint echo of what Atlantis might have perpetually represented. Not a paradise irrevocably lost, but a persistent reminder that the creation of paradise is a deliberate choice each generation must actively embrace. Day by day, decision by decision, with the same meticulous diligence that the Atlanteans once applied to cultivating their wondrous underwater gardens, before they tragically forgot that the most invaluable treasures are precisely those that can never be seized through coercive force. just as the saga of Atlantis serves as a poignant reminder that even seemingly flawless entities are susceptible to transformation, so too does it hint that change itself can be a perfect, albeit initially challenging, process. Indeed, some of the most profound metamorphoses unfold with such gradual subtlety that their onset is almost imperceptible. This is precisely how the season of autumn commences, is it not? One crisp morning, you step outdoors, and the air carries a faint, novel coolness that was absent the day prior. The vibrant leaves have yet to relinquish their verdant hues, and the summer blossoms still unfurl in full splendor. Yet an understated, fundamental shift has occurred within the ambient world. The ancient Greeks devised an exquisitely poetic explanation for this gentle seasonal transition. Their narrative commences with a youthful goddess, simply relishing a serene afternoon amidst a sprawling meadow. This setting, though reminiscent of Atlantis's peaceful gardens, possessed a wilder, more untamed character, brimming with the kind of organic beauty that flourishes without human intervention. Her name was Persephone, and she was the cherished daughter of Demeter, the venerable goddess who presided over all burgeoning life and the bounty of the earth. Had one been able to witness Persephone on that fateful day, one would have been struck by the seamless harmony with which she integrated into the natural world surrounding her. When her laughter rippled through the air, flowers seemed to bloom with an intensified brilliance. As she traversed the grassy expanses, the blades beneath her feet appeared to grow greener, more vibrant. There was an inherent grace in her movements that infused everything in her vicinity with a heightened sense of vitality and hope. Demeter, her protective mother, had meticulously reared her daughter in the sunlit world above, amidst undulating hills and sun-drenched meadows, far removed from the more shadowed and perilous corners of the mythological cosmos. It was a cautious, solicitous form of affection, akin to cultivating a delicate garden in the most sheltered spot imaginable, ensuring it received an optimal balance of sunlight and rain, yet shielded from excessive wind or biting frost. Demeter, having witnessed the vulnerability of beautiful things, understood the potential for harm when exposed prematurely to too much danger. On this particular afternoon, Persephone was engaged in her most beloved pastime, wandering through the meadow, gathering a collection of exquisite flowers. These were no ordinary blooms, however. Each one she carefully selected seemed to radiate with a gentle, intrinsic luminescence, as if it harbored a concentrated spark of the sun itself. Her movements were unhurried and deliberate, as if she were meticulously selecting ingredients for a grand feast, or choosing the perfect palette for an important masterpiece. The meadow through which she ambled was an oasis of profound tranquility, permeated by the soft, industrious hum of bees and the distant, soothing murmur of a stream flowing over smooth, ancient stones. Butterflies, like living jewels, danced gracefully around her, and diminutive birds would occasionally alight upon her shoulder, offering their melodious songs directly into her ear. It was the quintessential place where the very fabric of time seemed to behave differently, where an hour could swiftly pass like a minute, or a single minute could stretch into an eternity. Now it is at this juncture that the tale takes an unforeseen turn, though not with the dramatic, violent suddenness one might instinctively anticipate. As Persephone gently stooped to pluck a narcissus flower of extraordinary beauty, its pristine white petals encircling a golden heart, like a miniature sun encapsulated within a bloom. The very ground beneath her feet began to vibrate. It started with a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor, reminiscent of distant thunder or the deep purring of an immense, slumbering cat buried far beneath the earth's surface. Then, the earth itself began to cleave open, not with a violent rupture, but rather like ornate curtains gracefully parting to unveil a stage, or the slow, deliberate unfolding of a flower's petals to greet the morning light. From this emerging chasm rode Hades, the formidable god of the underworld, mounted in a chariot drawn by magnificent black horses that moved with the silent grace of shadows given corporeal form, their hooves making no sound as they touched the ground. It is a common misconception to perceive Hades as the villain in this ancient narrative. However, such a characterization is not entirely accurate. He was not inherently malevolent. Rather, he was profoundly solitary. Imagine an existence spent throughout eternity, surrounded solely by the ethereal spirits of the deceased, never experiencing the warmth of sunlight, never hearing the joyous sound of laughter, never partaking in the simple pleasure of observing something grow and flourish. His dominion was undeniably significant and an essential component of the cosmic order, yet it was also characterized by an almost unbearable isolation. Hades had, for a considerable period, been observing Persephone from afar, and he had become deeply captivated by her vibrant essence, her intrinsic connection to life, and the verdant processes of growth. However, as the sovereign ruler of the dead, he possessed no understanding whatsoever of the delicate art of proper courtship. He was unfamiliar with the nuances of offering flowers, arranging idyllic picnics, or engaging in gentle conversational overtures. Therefore, he acted in a manner that, to his own logic, seemed the most straightforward and appropriate. He simply conveyed her to his subterranean realm, operating under the assumption that, in time, she would come to cherish it as deeply as he did. The journey into the shadowy depths of the underworld was not the terrifying, precipitous plunge one might readily conjure in imagination. Instead, it was akin to a gradual descent, sinking slowly through successive layers of the earth, each stratum a little more hushed and a little more dimly lit than the last. Persephone watched in bewildered astonishment as they passed through vast caverns, illuminated by the eerie glow of luminous crystals, witnessed subterranean rivers that defied all known principles of hydraulics by flowing upwards, and beheld gardens where silver flowers bloomed in an eternal, ethereal twilight. Meanwhile, in the sunlit world above, Demeter began to register her daughter's prolonged absence. Initially, her concern was minimal. Persephone frequently became so utterly engrossed in the beauty surrounding her while gathering flowers that she would lose all track of time, allowing hours to dissolve like minutes. However, as the hours lengthened into days, Demeter's initial concern escalated into a gnawing panic, which then deepened into a grief so profound and pervasive that it began to exert a tangible influence upon the entirety of the world. You see, Demeter did not simply experience sadness in the way mortal beings do. When a goddess intimately connected with agriculture succumbs to sorrow, the very earth itself partakes in her lamentation. Plants across the globe began to wither and perish, not from the usual ravages of drought or disease, but from a kind of cosmic heartbreak. The golden grain in the sprawling fields turned brittle and brown. Fruit trees ceased their bountiful production. Even the verdant grass started to fade into a pale, lifeless hue, much like antique photographs left exposed to the sun for an extended period. But here's the aspect that renders this narrative so particularly intriguing. The environmental transformation did not manifest instantaneously. It was a gradual process, much like observing a photograph slowly losing its vibrancy under the relentless sun. Farmers across the land began to notice that their crops were not flourishing with their usual vigor. Gardeners observed that their beloved flowers were not blooming with their accustomed brilliance. It was, in essence, the world's inaugural autumn. Yet no living soul comprehended the profound shift that was occurring, simply because the concept of autumn had never before existed. The world had perpetually existed in a state of eternal spring, until the moment Demeter's heart was irrevocably shattered. Within the subterranean dominion, Persephone was encountering a realm profoundly distinct from any she had previously conceived. It was not the foreboding, terrifying expanse that most mortals envisioned. Instead, it presented itself as an expansive, serene dominion, permeated by subtle gloom and an ethereal luminescence that seemed to emanate from ubiquitous yet elusive sources. The departed souls of the deceased drifted tranquilly through arboreta of obsidian roses and argent lilies, unburdened at last by the mortal afflictions and anxieties that had plagued them during their earthly existence. Hades, with the profound satisfaction of revealing a cherished confidence, unveiled the entirety of his domain to her. He guided her through the verdant plains of Elysium, where venerated champions and virtuous souls spent their perpetual repose in a state akin to a blissful utopia. He presented her with the reflective waters where individuals could discern spectral images of their loved ones still dwelling in the terrestrial world, thus maintaining an ethereal bond across the veil separating the living from the deceased. He even introduced her to Cerberus, the formidable three-headed hound who stood sentinel over the portals, and who proved remarkably affable once one became acquainted with his true nature. Nevertheless, Persephone yearned for the radiant warmth of the sun. She longed for the caress of the zephyrs through her tresses and the melodious chorus of avifauna in the morning light. Most ardently, she missed her mother and the vibrant, burgeoning world of the surface. The underworld possessed a distinct, albeit somber, allure, yet its splendor was defined by finality rather than genesis, by tranquility rather than efflorescence, by contemplation rather than dynamism. Hades, for his part, was exerting his utmost endeavor to be a gracious host and solicitous companion. He offered her the most exquisite delicacies his dominion afforded, presented her with luxurious private quarters adorned with opulent silks and glittering gemstones, and invited her to stroll through enchanting arboreta of argent and crystalline formations. Yet there existed a crucial, immutable truth concerning the sustenance of the underworld. Once consumed, it indelibly bound one to that subterranean domain in a manner not readily reversible. Persephone scrupulously abstained from all sustenance, sustained solely by the cherished recollection of solar warmth and the fervent anticipation of her homecoming. However, after many days of unwavering yet tender persuasion from Hades and increasing physical enfeeblement from her fasting, she finally yielded to a meager repast. Merely 6 pomegranate arils, a mere sampling. They possessed a gem-like crimson hue and an essence of profound saccharine delight, like the very quintessence of summer's bounty distilled. On the terrestrial plane, The circumstances were rapidly deteriorating. The perpetual autumnal state, engendered by Demeter's profound sorrow, menacingly threatened to transmute into an interminable winter. Mortals commenced to suffer from famine. Fauna struggled to procure adequate sustenance. Even the divine beings themselves evinced apprehension, for a realm devoid of proliferation is inherently untenable. The fundamental tenets of being were exhibiting incipient fractures under the immense burden of a single deity's anguish. Zeus, sovereign of the Olympian pantheon, ultimately resolved to intercede. He dispatched Hermes, the divine herald, down to the underworld to broker the terms of Persephone's repatriation. Hermes was ideally suited for this diplomatic mission. He was among the select few deities capable of unhindered transit across the myriad dimensions of existence. Moreover, he possessed an innate aptitude for devising resolutions acceptable to all parties, even in the face of seemingly intractable predicaments. The dialogue between Hermes and Hades likely transpired with considerably more decorum than one might anticipate. Hades was not irrational, merely unversed in the intricacies of interpersonal connection and profoundly yearning for fellowship. When Hermes elucidated the dire state of the terrestrial realm's decline without Persephone, and how Demeter's grief was imperiling all terrestrial existence, Hades commenced to grasp the broader ramifications of his actions. He truly harbored no genuine malevolent intent to harm anyone. But then arose the dilemma posed by the consumption of the pomegranate seeds. Because Persephone had ingested food from the underworld, she was now bound to that chthonic domain by an indissoluble link that could not be simply undone. However, because she had ingested merely 6 arils, and because all parties concerned were keenly desirous of a resolution to avert planetary catastrophe, they were able to forge an accord that appeased the venerable statutes while alleviating the pressing exigency. Persephone would sojourn for half of every annual cycle in the underworld with Hades, a lunar period for each ingested aril. For the other 6 months, she would rejoin her mother in the terrestrial realm. It was an imperfect resolution for all individuals, but it was a mutually agreeable arrangement. Optimal resolutions seldom yield universal elation, but rather engender a balanced measure of tolerable dissatisfaction among all. And so the cyclical cadence of the seasons was inaugurated, like a profound celestial periodicity that would regulate the terrestrial sphere thenceforth. When Persephone ascends to the surface realm every vernal equinox, Demeter's profound jubilation incites universal efflorescence. The terrestrial globe rouses from its hibernal dormancy. Blossoms pierce the Earth's crust with resolute optimism. Arborescent forms burgeon with nascent foliage, and the planet rejuvenates with verdancy and vitality once again. It is as if the very globe exhales a profound sigh of contentment. During the estival period, when Persephone and Demeter are rejoined, all life thrives exuberantly. It is a time of profusion and proliferation, of extended, balmy daylight hours and the realization of the planet's inherent fecundity. Horticultural plots teem with bountiful produce. Fruit-bearing groves sag beneath their weighty yields, and the biotic realm rejoices at the return of the divinity responsible for all terrestrial vitality. But as the juncture nears for Persephone to descend to the chthonic domain, Demeter's sorrow reawakens, and the world commences its gradual transition into autumn. Foliage undergoes a chromatic metamorphosis, as if mirroring the poignant sentiments of impending parting. Bounties of the earth are collected and preserved. The globe readies itself for the quiescent period of hibernal anticipation. The frigid season thus transforms into an era of dormancy rather than cessation, of serene expectation rather than definitive finality. It is when Persephone presides as sovereign of the subterranean kingdom, imparting a measure of her warmth and animation to that hushed dominion, while the surface world slumbers and anticipates her inevitable reappearance. Even in the most frigid and tenebrous periods, there remains an enduring assurance that spring will come again. The profound elegance of this ancient narrative lies in how it elucidates not merely the changing seasons, but also the inherent dynamics of transformation within human existence. Sometimes we must spend time in more shadowed, introspective phases, not as a punitive measure, but as an integral component of a grand cosmic oscillation that encompasses both efflorescence and repose, both elation and contemplation, both union and relinquishment. The Hellenes comprehended that a perpetual estival period is unattainable, just as an unending vernal season is impossible. Every segment of the year offers its unique boons, its pedagogical insights, its distinct aesthetic quality. Winter instills fortitude and resilience. Spring imparts revitalization and optimism. Summer bestows plenitude and culmination. Autumn guides toward release and readiness. Each is indispensable. Each holds intrinsic worth. All are a part of the overarching paradigm that facilitates existence. And perhaps of paramount significance, the narrative intimates that even the most arduous transformations can lead to novel forms of comprehension. Persephone transmuted into not merely the divinity of vernal vitality and burgeoning flora, but also the sovereign of the chthonic domain, someone who comprehended the dichotomies of mortality and demise, of genesis and cessation. Her sojourn across both dimensions endowed her with profound sagacity and heightened empathy than she would have possessed had she remained perpetually in the luminous pastures of her youth. As we accommodate ourselves to whichever temporal phase we currently inhabit, whether it is the climactic period beyond our pains or the epoch of our personal journey, we might recall the narrative of Persephone and derive solace from the awareness that all seasons, including the challenging ones, are part of a larger pattern that encompasses both disjunction and conjunction, both culminations and fresh starts, both the indispensable melancholy of relinquishment and the unavoidable felicity of returning to one's origin. Just as Persephone ascertained that certain transformations originate from affection, even when they initially appear arduous, there exist alternative narratives about changes that stem from a distinct manifestation of devotion, the love that jeopardizes all for the welfare of fellow beings. Have you ever undertaken an action with foreknowledge of impending repercussions, yet pursued it because you deemed it morally imperative? That is the caliber of resolution that forges champions and reconfigures the global paradigm. And it is precisely the species of dilemma confronted by Prometheus on a day when divinities and mortals were yet in the nascent stages of cohabitation. Prometheus was a primordial titan, which signified he belonged to the antecedent divine lineage to Zeus and his siblings. But in stark contrast to numerous of his brethren titans, Prometheus had elected to align himself with Zeus during the monumental conflict between the elder and nascent deities. He was renowned for his perspicacity and his capacity for profound prescience. His name etymologically signified premeditation, denoting the faculty of anticipating future ramifications and comprehending their implications prior to their materialization. What distinguished Prometheus from most of the other gods was his sincere affection for humankind. While numerous deities regarded humanity either as instrumental vassals or diverting diversions, Prometheus beheld humanity and perceived latent capacities. He observed them contending arduously for existence in a world replete with perilous fauna and inclement climatic conditions. And he experienced an emotion seldom evinced by the divine compassion. It was as if he discerned not merely humanity's current state, but its prospective evolution. In those nascent epochs, humans subsisted in a vastly dissimilar manner than they do today. They occupied their waking hours foraging for wild fruits and tubers, pursuing minor game with pointed rudimentary implements, and congregating for shelter within caverns once the sun had set. They were devoid of implements, save for rudimentary stones and arboreal limbs. They lacked any method of preparing nourishment beyond solar desiccation. And upon the onset of the hibernal season, they were compelled to withstand the frigid temperatures and rely on the slender hope of sufficient provisions to see them through until the vernal resurgence. On the resplendent heights of Mount Olympus, the celestial beings resided in an unparalleled state of ease and opulence, surrounded by a myriad of amenities that rendered their existence unburdened and delightful. They partook of ambrosia and nectar, celestial provisions whose savor far surpassed any earthly delicacy. Their magnificent palaces boasted perennially temperate climates, ensuring comfort throughout the year. Yet of paramount significance to our narrative, they possessed fire, not merely any ordinary flame, but a divine conflagration that burned eternally and held the power to forge marvelous creations. However, Zeus, the king of the gods, had unequivocally decreed that this potent element was excessively powerful and inherently perilous to share with humanity. He harbored profound anxieties that if mortals acquired fire, they would become unduly self-reliant and excessively competent. Such a development might lead them to forsake their due veneration of the gods, or perhaps even presume to defy the Olympian pantheon itself. It was far safer, Zeus reasoned, to maintain humans in a state of subservience and appreciation, akin to children who relied entirely on their parental figures. Prometheus, nonetheless, held a divergent perspective. He observed the human populace enduring frigid nocturnal hours, subsisting on uncooked sustenance and grappling with profound obscurity in the absence of light. He found this state of affairs gratuitously severe. Humans, he mused, were not aspiring to usurp cosmic dominion or achieve immortality. They simply yearned for warmth, desired the ability to prepare their food, and sought a modicum of illumination once the sun had descended. To Prometheus, these appeared as justifiable petitions, fundamental requirements that any benevolent entity would instinctively wish to help fulfill. Thus he began to devise a stratagem. It would need to be covert and inconspicuous, for Zeus's vigilant gaze was perpetually fixed upon all realms, and it would have to be executed with utmost expedition, as any discovery of his clandestine act by Zeus would inevitably trigger rapid and draconian retribution. Prometheus had been pondering this predicament for an extended duration, and he had discerned a crucial operational insight regarding the inner workings of Olympus. The gods, much like mortals, adhered to established patterns of daily existence, and these predictable cycles invariably engendered opportune moments. Each day, the Olympian deities kindled a magnificent blaze for their culinary repasts and sacred rites. This fire smoldered within an ornate censer situated in the heart of their communal assembly hall, and it was meticulously maintained by various lesser deities and ethereal entities throughout the day. Yet there existed a fleeting, invaluable interval just after the evening meal when all were engrossed in convivial discourse and boisterous amusements, leaving the sacred flame momentarily bereft of oversight for a few precious minutes. Prometheus bided his time for precisely such an opportune night. The gods had been commemorating an event, perhaps a divine birthday, or the triumphant culmination of an Olympian undertaking. Melodies and mirth filled the air, nectarous libations circulated without restraint, and everyone present was unburdened and ebullient. Zeus himself was immersed in animated colloquy with his siblings, making expansive oratorical motions as he recounted some tale of his latest adventure, his voice reverberating sonorously throughout the resplendent marble chambers, ambling with a semblance of nonchalance, as if merely extending his limbs after the repast. Prometheus gravitated imperceptibly toward the magnificent fire. He had meticulously readied himself for this juncture by bringing with him a vacuous ferula stem, an object that presented an utterly innocuous visage but was, in actuality, capable of serving as a clandestine vessel for flame, impervious to external detection. The fennel stalk was sufficiently elongated to access the flames, yet sufficiently slender to be effortlessly secreted within his robes. With movements so fluid and unforced that they drew no attention, Prometheus submerged the extremity of the fennel stalk into the divine fire. The flame ignited within the tubular cavity, imperceptible from an external vantage, yet smoldering with unwavering constancy within. He then sealed the aperture with a small quantity of argil, encapsulating the stolen embers as if a profound enigma poised for disclosure. The whole process transpired in under 60 seconds, and to any casual observer, he merely appeared to be casually tending to the embers, as is often done at such gatherings. The most arduous phase came next, exiting the celestial abode without inciting any misgivings. Prometheus was unable to vanish abruptly, for such an act would be instantly perceived. Instead, he had to engage in civil discourse, offer mirthful responses to Zeus's jests, and imperceptibly maneuver himself to the periphery of the gathering, simulating a normal departure after an agreeable soiree. Each fleeting moment stretched into an eternity. Every innocent query from another god resonated as a probing inquiry. Finally, he was able to discreetly withdraw from the Olympian revelry and commence his journey toward the terrestrial realm. This was a journey that typically consumed a considerable duration, even for a god. But Prometheus was impelled by a pressing imperative. Each moment he tarried was another moment Zeus might uncover the pilfered element, another chance for his scheme to be unmasked prior to its fruition. He located an assembly of mortals encamped beside an aqueous artery, the very group he had been observing with empathetic solicitude for a protracted period. They were congregated closely to ward off the chill, masticating unprocessed tubers and desiccated flesh, anticipating the dawn's ascension so they might possess sufficient visibility to forage for sustenance. Their faces were fatigued and acquiescent, displaying the stoic fortitude of people accustomed to meager expectations from existence. Prometheus advanced upon them with measured steps, desirous of avoiding their alarm. Deities rarely deigned to interact directly with the human populace, and when they did, it frequently presaged ill tidings. Yet, An inherent benignity and solace emanated from Prometheus's bearing. He descended to their level, settling amongst them with an air of natural affinity, and delicately dislodged the argillaceous seal from his fennel stalk. What transpired next surely appeared as the most astonishing thaumaturgy these humans had ever witnessed. A flame manifested seemingly ex nihilo, flickering vivaciously at the extremity of Prometheus's implement. But this transcended mere terrestrial combustion. It was celestial conflagration, incandescent with unparalleled luminosity and pristine purity compared to any mundane blaze they had previously encountered, imparting illumination and caloric comfort in exquisite equilibrium. Prometheus instructed them in the proper method of kindling sustenance for the flames with dry wood and leaves, how to mount it strategically to ensure a gradual, prolonged combustion through the nocturnal hours, and how to prepare flesh for consumption, rendering it both salubrious and delectable beyond anything they had tasted before. He taught them to fashion portable luminaries so they could bear illumination during their peregrinations. He even demonstrated how to utilize fire to fortify the tips of their hunting implements and to repel menacing fauna. However, the endowment of fire transcended mere utilitarian function. It heralded the dawn of organized human society itself. With fire, humans could engage in nocturnal endeavors, thereby prolonging their periods of industry. They could inhabit frigid regions, significantly enlarging their domains. They could refine culinary practices, which led to enhanced sustenance and greater leisure for pursuits beyond mere subsistence. They could congregate amidst the radiating heat and luminous glow, to narrate sagas, to formulate strategies, and to evolve beyond isolated beings merely striving for existence. Most importantly, fire instilled in humans a feeling of dominion and mastery over their surroundings that had hitherto been unknown. For the first time, they could actively alter their conditions instead of passively tolerating them. They could ameliorate their existence through personal exertion and inherent sagacity. The flame that Prometheus brought them was truly the emblem of nascent aspiration itself. Back on Olympus, it was not long before Zeus began to perceive an anomaly. The divine fire was diminished in its customary intensity, and accounts from fellow deities concerning peculiar luminescence being observed in the terrestrial sphere beneath reached his ears. When Zeus comprehended the transgression, his wrath was instantaneous and cataclysmic, causing the very bedrock of the Olympian citadel to tremble. But here lies the noteworthy aspect of Zeus's furious reprisal. His indignation transcended the mere act of larceny. It stemmed from its profound symbolic ramifications. Prometheus had flouted an explicit celestial edict, yes, but more significantly, he had demonstrated that he prioritized mortal prosperity above Olympian dominion. This was precisely the exact ideological inclination that had long vexed Zeus, the perilous example that threatened to subvert the established cosmic hierarchy. The retribution meticulously conceived by Zeus for Prometheus was engineered for both its brutal intensity and its profound emblematic significance. Prometheus was fettered to a craggy summit within the Caucasian range, secured by adamantine shackles impervious to any terrestrial or celestial might. Yet, that was not the most harrowing component of his ordeal. Mere incarceration proved insufficient to appease Zeus's stringent demand for recompense. Each day, a colossal avian predator would come to the mountain where Prometheus was chained. This eagle would rend open Prometheus's flank and devour his vital organ, causing agonizing torment. But due to Prometheus's inherent deathlessness, his hepatic organ would regenerate fully during the nocturnal hours, restoring him to perfect corporeal integrity. And the next day, the eagle would reappear to perpetrate the same gruesome ritual. The punishment was orchestrated to endure perpetually, an interminable rotation of agony and restoration. This punishment was intended to persist until such time as Prometheus consented to offer contrition and vowed perpetual non-intervention in celestial decrees. Zeus harbored an unwavering conviction that ultimately the unrelenting torment and soul-crushing tedium would shatter even Prometheus's formidable resolve. Indeed, an infinite span represents an immeasurable duration to endure for a solitary transgression of authority. But here's where the story becomes genuinely extraordinary. Despite the quotidian torment, despite the solitary confinement and the interminable recurrence of his anguish, Prometheus remained utterly unrepentant concerning his choice to aid humanity. When other gods visited him and proposed a cessation to his torment through a mere act of contrition to Zeus, he steadfastly declined, even when physical agony impeded his articulation. His rationale was straightforward yet deeply significant. He had beheld the nascent potential of humankind when they were endowed with the means to elevate their existence. Even from his craggy incarceration, he could discern the tendrils of smoke from their burgeoning hearths unfurling across the globe. He knew that they were preparing more nutritious sustenance, maintaining warmth through the frigid season, and commencing the cultivation of the intellectual and practical disciplines facilitated by fire. Each solar cycle of suffering was deemed a worthwhile sacrifice, Prometheus believed, because it had procured an asset beyond measure. Humans, for their part, never neglected the profound deeds Prometheus had accomplished on their behalf. They bestowed upon him the epithet of Firebringer, circulating narratives that extolled his valor and the immense personal sacrifice he had made. Some even posited that the very faculties enabling human thought, creation, and affection stemmed from Prometheus having instilled within them a measure of his own celestial essence, concurrent with the bestowal of flame. In their manifold artistic and poetic expressions, they commemorated him not as a deity who had undergone chastisement, but rather as a champion who had consciously chosen compassion over personal security. Ultimately, after the passage of many centuries, Prometheus was at last liberated from his arduous torment. However, that constitutes a separate chronicle, reserved for another tranquil evening. What holds significance for this particular night is a thorough comprehension of the profound meaning embedded in his self-offering, and the underlying reasons for his willingness to endure such extensive suffering for the benefit of individuals he scarcely knew. His motivation transcended the pursuit of personal glory, public recognition, or even the expectation of gratitude. Instead, it was fundamentally rooted in his ability to discern latent capabilities within others and his resolute readiness to bear the considerable cost required to facilitate the actualization of that inherent promise. Perhaps this profound understanding stemmed from Prometheus grasping a truth that Zeus, in his relentless preoccupation with maintaining dominion and order, had entirely overlooked. The most invaluable endowment one can bestow upon another is not merely comfort or a sense of security, but rather the essential instruments and knowledge they require to forge their own comfort. and establish their own safety. Fire, in this context, was far more than a simple means for warmth or the preparation of sustenance. It embodied the fundamental principle that humanity merited the opportunity to elevate their own existences, to evolve beyond their current state. And perhaps this is precisely why this ancient narrative continues to resonate so powerfully in our contemporary world, as we gradually succumb to slumber, contemplating the choices we make and the sacrifices we are prepared to undertake for the ideals we hold dear. Every instance where an individual jeopardizes their personal ease to assist others, every occasion where someone elects to impart wisdom or share resources that possess the potential to improve the global condition, they are, in essence, emulating the heroic journey of Prometheus, the venerable Titan who concluded that certain principles are indeed worth enduring hardship for, and that the illumination we extend to others is never diminished by its widespread dissemination. Just as Prometheus comprehended that unconventional thinking is often requisite for surmounting seemingly insurmountable obstacles, there exists another narrative illustrating the power of divergent thought. Though this one originates from the brutal theater of human warfare, rather than the ethereal domain of the gods. Following a protracted decade of relentless conflict, the combatants on both opposing sides were afflicted by a weariness that permeated far deeper than a mere need for restorative sleep. Their fatigue was ingrained in their very bones, resonating within their spirits. They were profoundly exhausted from prolonged separation from their homes and kin, and utterly drained by the endless struggle for an objective that appeared increasingly ambiguous with the passage of each successive season. It was within this pervasive atmosphere of profound exhaustion and intense yearning for peace that one of history's most celebrated stratagems was conceived. Its genesis was not rooted in malice or animosity, but rather in the elemental desire of thousands of men to finally return to their wives and children, and to reclaim the tranquil existences they had relinquished so many years prior. The protracted conflict at Troy had endured for such an extended period that some of the younger soldiers possessed no clear recollection of life prior to its commencement. Their formative years had unfolded within the confines of military encampments, where they had acquired their specialized skills amidst the intervals between fierce engagements. Their most profound bonds of camaraderie had been forged under the imposing shadow of city walls that consistently defied all attempts to breach them, regardless of the immense effort expended. For these individuals, warfare had transformed from being merely an activity they performed into an intrinsic component of their very identities. Troy itself was an extraordinary metropolis, strategically positioned on an elevated hill commanding an impressive view of the sea, its fortifications so colossal and formidable that they appeared to have been engineered by mythical giants rather than mortal hands. The massive stones were interlocked with such flawless precision that it was impossible to insert even a knife blade between them, and they ascended from the earth like natural precipices, conveying the impression that the city had organically emerged from the hill, rather than merely being constructed upon its summit. The Trojans, ensconced within, possessed an abundance of provisions and water, robust defensive structures, and the significant tactical advantage of engaging the enemy on their familiar home ground. They were intimately acquainted with every thoroughfare and alleyway, every clandestine passage and concealed entrance. The Greeks, encamped outside, boasted superior numerical strength and some of the most formidable warriors known to the world. Yet, after a full decade of relentless assaults, they had achieved remarkably little progress. Their Sisyphean endeavor was akin to attempting to dismantle a mountain with hammers, an arduous and exhaustive task that yielded no discernible results. It was Odysseus, the sagacious king of the island of Ithaca, who ultimately conceived the ingenious strategy destined to bring the protracted war to its conclusion. Odysseus was widely renowned for his exceptional cleverness, not the ostentatious, theatrical kind of intellect that manifests in grand orations, but rather the pragmatic, solution-oriented mind that masterfully devises methods to achieve objectives when conventional approaches have unequivocally failed. He possessed a unique cognitive faculty that allowed him to scrutinize an apparently impossible situation and discern the singular, minute detail that had eluded everyone else. He had been meticulously contemplating the formidable problem of Troy for many months, diligently studying the city's intricate defenses during the daylight hours, and remaining wakeful through the nights, observing the distant flickering torches atop the walls, and discerning the faint sounds of life emanating from within. He assiduously monitored the daily routines of its defenders, searching for any exploitable vulnerability or recurring pattern. And gradually, a concept began to crystallize in his mind. An idea so deceptively simple and yet so audaciously bold that it held the genuine potential for success. The audacious plan he presented to the other Greek commanders was utterly unlike any tactic they had previously employed. Instead of striving to dismantle Troy's impregnable walls through brute force, or attempting to compel its defenders into submission through starvation, their objective was to ingeniously deceive the Trojans into voluntarily opening their own gates. This stratagem would necessitate meticulous feigning, impeccable synchronization, and a degree of inherent peril that caused considerable apprehension among some of the commanding officers. Nevertheless, after 10 years of fruitless conventional warfare, they had reached a point where they were prepared to embrace an entirely unorthodox approach. The pivotal element, the very centerpiece of Odysseus's intricate plan, was a magnificent wooden horse. But this was to be no ordinary equine effigy of timber. This would represent a true masterpiece of artisanal skill, so immense in scale and so aesthetically exquisite that it would appear to be a divine offering worthy of the gods themselves. It needed to possess sufficient grandeur to captivate the attention and pique the intense curiosity of the Trojans, yet simultaneously be cavernous enough to conceal a small contingent of elite Greek soldiers within its hollow interior. Most crucially, its appearance had to be entirely consistent with something the Greeks would genuinely abandon as a sacred religious tribute. The demanding construction of this monumental horse swiftly became an all-consuming project that engrossed the entire Greek encampment for a period of several weeks. They were tasked with sourcing the precise type of timber, material robust enough to adequately bear the considerable weight of the colossal structure and the warriors hidden inside, yet simultaneously sufficiently lightweight to permit the actual movement of the horse. They needed to ingeniously design concealed entryways and discreet ventilation apertures that would remain entirely imperceptible from the exterior. Most importantly, they faced the formidable challenge of creating a work of art so profoundly beautiful that the Trojans would be irresistibly compelled to bring it within the sanctity of their city walls. The master craftsman selected for this intricate undertaking was Hypnos, a Greek who was more widely celebrated for his exceptional dexterity with tools than for his prowess with weapons. He approached the project with the identical meticulousness and profound attention to detail he might have dedicated to the construction of a revered temple or a magnificent royal palace. The horse that gradually took magnificent shape under his skilled hands was truly resplendent, intricately carved with elaborate details, and then meticulously painted and polished until its surface gleamed with the lustrous sheen of bronze under the intense sunlight. Every sinew and muscle of the equine form was rendered with flawless anatomical accuracy. However, concurrently with the laborious construction of the horse, an equally vital component of the overarching plan was also meticulously taking form. The Greeks needed to convincingly persuade the Trojans that they had utterly capitulated and had departed for their homeland. This objective entailed not merely concealing the elite soldiers destined to be hidden within the horse, but also orchestrating the credible disappearance of the entire Greek army. After a decade of their constant, visible presence, their sudden absence had to appear both entirely plausible and unequivocally permanent. The ingenious solution involved navigating their entire fleet to a nearby island, strategically positioned where the ships would be completely invisible from Troy's formidable walls, yet sufficiently proximate to allow for their swift return when the predetermined signal was issued. The vast majority of the army would embark with the ships, leaving behind only the select men concealed within the wooden horse, and a single courageous volunteer who would remain to present a meticulously fabricated narrative to the Trojans. That particular volunteer was Sinon, a Greek soldier upon whom rested perhaps the most perilous assignment within the entirety of the intricate plan. His role demanded that he deliberately allow himself to be apprehended by the Trojans, and then proceed to convince them that he was a genuine deserter, bearing crucial intelligence concerning the enigmatic wooden horse. His fabricated narrative would necessarily have to be utterly credible, sufficient to deceive a populace who possessed every conceivable reason to harbor profound suspicion, and simultaneously persuasive enough to manipulate them into executing precisely what the Greeks desired. On the momentous morning when the audacious plan was finally set into motion, the Trojans awoke to a sight they had never in their wildest dreams anticipated. The sprawling Greek encampment stood entirely empty. The multitude of ships that had thronged their harbor for 10 long years had vanished. The cooking fires, which had burned continuously for a decade, were now cold and lifeless. The tents had been meticulously dismantled, the equipment loaded onto unseen vessels, and the immense army that had so relentlessly besieged their city had evaporated as completely and suddenly as a fleeting dream at the break of dawn. The initial reaction among the Trojans was a profound blend of circumspection and outright disbelief. After a full decade of unremitting warfare, the abrupt and unexpected disappearance of their formidable enemies seemed almost too good to be genuinely true. Scouts were immediately dispatched to meticulously search the abandoned encampment for any telltale signs of a potential trap, while others ascended to the highest towers of the city to diligently scan the distant horizon for any trace of the Greek fleet. Yet the vast expanse of the sea stretched empty towards the distant line where sky met water, and the abandoned camp bore every conceivable indicator of a swift, yet unequivocally genuine departure. As the hours slowly elapsed and no insidious trap was revealed, a palpable sense of excitement began to swell within the city. Could it truly be over? Had the Greeks genuinely capitulated and finally sailed for their distant homes, the colossal wooden horse, standing in silent majesty upon the beach, rapidly became the focal point of intense public curiosity and vigorous debate. Some individuals found its craftsmanship exquisitely beautiful. Others perceived it as an ominous and foreboding presence, yet everyone universally agreed that its sheer scale and striking appearance made it utterly impossible to ignore. A faction of Trojans vehemently argued that it was patently a ruse of some kind and should be immediately destroyed without hesitation. Conversely, others passionately contended that it was unequivocally a religious offering, deliberately left behind by the Greeks to appease the gods for their protracted failure to conquer the city. A smaller group suggested that its intrinsic value might be substantial enough to warrant its preservation, irrespective of its original purpose. This fervent debate persisted for many hours, characterized by impassioned arguments from all sides of the contention. Amidst the fervent discussions and tense deliberations, a solitary figure named Sinon was discovered, secreted away within the desolate remnants of the Greek encampment, seemingly making every effort to elude detection. When eventually apprehended and presented before the assembled Trojan leadership, he projected an air of profound trepidation and a discernible reluctance to articulate his thoughts. This calculated display, it must be noted, was precisely the psychological effect he intended to cultivate. Such genuine seeming fear and hesitation invariably proved far more persuasive to an audience than any overt or enthusiastic willingness to cooperate might have achieved. The narrative Sinon subsequently wove was meticulously crafted, designed with a keen understanding of Trojan sensibilities and their underlying psychological predispositions. He presented himself as a forlorn deserter, having purportedly absconded from the Greek forces after being designated as a human sacrifice, an offering intended to propitiate the gods and ensure auspicious winds for their long-awaited homeward voyage. The colossal wooden horse, he asserted, was indeed a sacred votive offering, constructed specifically to mollify the goddess Athena, whom the Greeks had grievously offended by pilfering a revered statue from her hallowed temple within Troy. Yet, the pivotal revelation of his account lay in the following detail. The Greeks, he declared, had deliberately engineered the horse to be too immense to pass through Troy's formidable gates. This, he explained, was because a prophetic oracle had foretold that if the Trojans ever succeeded in ushering the massive effigy into their city, Troy itself would be profoundly blessed by Athena's divine favor, rendering it perpetually unconquerable by any adversary. The Greeks, Sinon cunningly insisted, had constructed the horse to such an imposing scale precisely to thwart this auspicious outcome for the Trojans. This fabrication, steeped in divine prophecy and the promise of impregnable security, was precisely the sort of intelligence the Trojans were predisposed to embrace with eager credulity. Not only did it suggest that admitting the horse into their metropolis would pose no inherent danger, but it also promised to imbue their city with an unprecedented and enduring strength, making them more secure than ever before imagined. Consequently, the heated debate concerning the horse's fate swiftly transmuted from a cautious inquiry into its potential perils to an urgent discussion about the most expeditious means of bringing it within their protective walls. Suddenly, the notion of abandoning such a potent symbol on the beach seemed not merely an oversight, but a squandering of an unparalleled and divinely ordained opportunity. The monumental task of maneuvering the enormous wooden horse through the city's ancient gates necessitated a significant feat of engineering ingenuity. The gates themselves required substantial widening, and considerable sections of the formidable wall had to be temporarily dismantled to accommodate its bulk. The arduous endeavor consumed the better part of a day and demanded the collective efforts of hundreds of citizens, all toiling relentlessly. Nevertheless, by dusk, the magnificent wooden horse proudly stood within Troy's central square, encircled by jubilant citizens who believed, with fervent conviction, that they had secured not merely a fleeting victory, but an eternal guarantee of their beloved city's safety and prosperity. That particular evening, the city of Troy erupted in a spontaneous and unrestrained celebration, a revelry more profound and widespread than any witnessed in the preceding 10 years. The streets vibrated with the sounds of exuberant feasting and copious drinking, accompanied by the lively strains of music and spirited dancing. The protracted war, they rejoiced, was definitively concluded. Their cherished city was safe, and they possessed a magnificent, tangible trophy to unequivocally confirm their triumph. As the hours of the night wore on and the festivities intensified, the weary Trojans gradually gravitated toward their homes and their beds, utterly spent by the day's excitement and the immense wave of relief that had washed over them, ultimately succumbing to a slumber more profound than any they had experienced in a decade. Yet concealed within the hollow belly of the wooden horse, a select contingent of Greek warriors maintained a cramped and profoundly uncomfortable silence. They had endured concealment within its confines for nearly 2 full days, their movements severely restricted, subsisting on meager rations of food and water, all the while acutely aware of the vibrant sounds of the unsuspecting city surrounding them, patiently awaiting the precise moment to emerge. Every muscle in their bodies ached, every joint felt stiff and protesting, but they endured, exhibiting the unwavering patience of seasoned soldiers who instinctively knew their pivotal moment of action was finally at hand. As the city at last descended into profound quietude, and the last of the revelers had stumbled their way home, Odysseus, their cunning leader, issued the prearranged signal. The cleverly concealed door in the horse's underside swung open noiselessly, and one by one, the Greek warriors descended into the moonlit central square of Troy. They moved with the spectral stealth of phantoms through the slumbering city, their footsteps meticulously muffled, their weapons held at the ready, though fervently hoping their use would prove unnecessary. Their immediate and paramount objective was to reach the heavily fortified city gates and unbar them for the remainder of the Greek army, which had sailed back under the protective shroud of darkness and now lay poised, waiting just beyond the formidable walls. This phase of the meticulously planned operation represented the most perilous undertaking of the entire stratagem. Should the Trojans become aware of the unfolding treachery before the gates could be opened, the small, isolated group of Greeks would find themselves irrevocably trapped within the city, devoid of any prospect of escape or reinforcement. However, a fortuitous blend of good luck and meticulous planning proved to be on their side. The Trojans, thoroughly exhausted by their boisterous celebrations and utterly convinced of their absolute security behind their supposedly impregnable walls, were lost in a deep, undisturbed sleep. The Greek warriors managed to reach the colossal gates without encountering a single sentry, and within mere minutes they had systematically removed the massive bars and chains that had steadfastly kept their army at bay for 10 arduous years. The great, ancient gates of Troy swung open on silent hinges, and at that pivotal moment, the war that had consumed a decade of lives and resources was, in essence, irrevocably concluded. What transpired thereafter was swift and utterly decisive, yet there lingers an almost anticlimactic quality to the rapidity with which everything concluded once the elaborate deception had achieved its intended effect. After 10 grueling years of relentless siege warfare, replete with legendary heroes dueling in single combat, grand strategic maneuvers, and desperate last-ditch defenses, the final culminating chapter was penned not by the clash of swords or the might of armies, but by the sheer force of clever thinking and patient, meticulous execution. It stood as an undeniable testament to the triumph of intellectual prowess over brute force, a victory of careful, intricate planning over direct, unyielding confrontation. The enduring lesson imparted by the tale of the Trojan horse transcends a mere commentary on the ingenuity of the Greeks or the perceived naivete of the Trojans. It speaks to a more universal truth: how solutions to seemingly insurmountable problems frequently arise from a paradigm shift in thinking, from approaching a challenging situation from an entirely unexpected and unconventional angle. There are instances where the most direct path is not only the most arduous, but, in fact, utterly impassable. At times, one must consciously step back, reevaluate the problem from a fresh perspective, and ingeniously devise a method to circumvent an obstacle rather than attempting to force a way through it. And perhaps, intertwined with this narrative, there exists another profound lesson concerning the inherent peril of clinging to the belief that any victory is perpetually secure, or that any defensive barrier is truly impregnable. The Trojans had steadfastly endured a decade of siege, successfully repelling every assault, outlasting every conceivable strategy their adversaries could concoct. Their unwavering confidence in the strength of their walls and the vigilance of their guards was, by all conventional metrics, entirely justifiable, until, that is, it suddenly ceased to be. Even the most robust and formidable defenses can, on occasion, be breached and overcome, not through overwhelming force, but by subtly manipulating the defenders into willingly compromising those very defenses themselves. As we contemplate this ancient narrative, perhaps as we drift towards slumber, we might cultivate an appreciation for both the profound cleverness of Odysseus and the heart-wrenching tragedy that befell Troy. It highlights the remarkable capacity of human ingenuity to resolve what appear to be impossible dilemmas, but simultaneously underscores the sobering reality that trust, once irrevocably betrayed, can never truly be restored to its original state. The wooden horse remains an indelible reminder that occasionally the most alluring and seemingly benevolent gifts bear the most exorbitant prices, and that the human mind, when appropriately and astutely applied, can wield a power far exceeding that of all the armies in the world combined. Recalling how Odysseus instinctively grasped that even the most intricate problems sometimes yield to surprisingly straightforward solutions, we now turn our attention to an entirely distinct saga of exploration. This is another narrative detailing a different kind of odyssey, one that commenced as a relatively simple quest, but progressively evolved into something far more intricate and demanding. This is the compelling tale of Jason and his formidable ship, laden with heroes, embarking on a perilous voyage toward a treasure that appeared utterly impossible to unearth, traversing treacherous seas that tested their resolve and capabilities in ways they had never anticipated. Jason's epic began with one of those familial disputes that, while initially appearing minor, possessed the insidious capacity to fundamentally reshape entire destinies. His uncle, Peleus, had unlawfully usurped the throne that rightfully belonged to Jason's father. Now, having matured into manhood, Jason returned to assert his legitimate claim. This was precisely the kind of confrontation that historically ignited civil wars, leading to years of relentless conflict and widespread bloodshed, were it not for Peleus's inherent cunning. Rather than engaging Jason in direct confrontation, Peleus extended a seemingly magnanimous offer. He would willingly relinquish the throne, he declared, if Jason could successfully accomplish just one formidable task: retrieve the fabled golden fleece from the distant and perilous land of Colchis. It appeared, on the surface, to be a reasonable, even generous proposition, until one grasped the grim reality that no one who had ever ventured forth in pursuit of the golden fleece had ever returned alive. Peleus was, in essence, offering to bestow kingship upon Jason in exchange for Jason inadvertently securing his own demise. However, Jason possessed the boundless enthusiasm and self-assurance of youth, qualities mirrored by the equally confident companions who surrounded him. The captivating prospect of embarking on a heroic quest, of sailing into uncharted territories to claim a legendary prize that would definitively secure his future, resonated with him in a manner that years of tedious political maneuvering and cautious diplomatic negotiations never could. He readily accepted the daunting challenge and almost immediately commenced the meticulous planning for what would become the most ambitious and daring expedition ever conceived. The initial, crucial step involved the construction of a vessel truly worthy of such an extraordinary mission. This was destined to be no ordinary trading ship or humble fishing boat, but rather a specialized craft meticulously designed for arduous, long-distance voyages across treacherous and dangerous waters. Jason therefore commissioned the renowned master shipbuilder, Argus, to create an unprecedented marvel, a ship of sufficient grandeur to accommodate a distinguished crew of heroes, swift enough to outpace marauding pirates and formidable sea monsters, and robust enough to withstand whatever tempestuous storms they might inevitably encounter. The magnificent vessel that Argus painstakingly constructed was truly a sight to behold. He christened it the Argo, in homage to himself, and it swiftly gained renown not merely for its impressive dimensions and aesthetic beauty, but for the unparalleled attention to detail invested in every single component. The timbers for its hull were sourced from sacred groves, having been specially blessed by the gods themselves. Its distinctive figurehead was intricately carved from an ancient oak tree possessing the mystical ability to utter prophecies. Every rope, every sail, every wooden peg was affixed with the meticulous precision of a master craftsman, one who possessed an innate understanding that the very lives of heroes would ultimately depend upon the unwavering integrity of his labor. Nevertheless, a ship, irrespective of how impeccably it is engineered, remains ultimately only as formidable as its crew. And Jason required mariners who possessed far more than mere sailing proficiency. He needed individuals endowed with the courage and resilience to confront the seemingly impossible and to persevere against all odds. Thus, a resounding call was disseminated across the entirety of Greece, inviting heroes willing to join this unparalleled expedition. The response was nothing short of extraordinary. Warriors of renown, gifted musicians, celebrated athletes, and intrepid adventurers converged from every corner of the Greek world, each bringing their unique skills, their personal legends, and their compelling narratives to the collective endeavor. Among them, of course, was Heracles, the strongest mortal who had ever walked the earth, whose mere presence was sufficient to deter most enemies from contemplating an attack. There was Orpheus, whose enchanting music possessed the power to pacify ferocious beasts and soothe even the most savage of hearts. The twin brothers, Castor and Pollux, famed for their unparalleled prowess in boxing and horsemanship respectively, also answered the call. And there was Atalanta, the swift huntress, renowned for her ability to outrun any man and her unmatched accuracy with a bow. Each Argonaut, a name bestowed upon these intrepid voyagers, contributed a distinct and invaluable talent to the grand undertaking. Some individuals were celebrated for their formidable physical might, renowned for their prowess in battle or their sheer strength of limb. Others were revered for their profound sagacity, possessing keen intellects capable of strategic thought and astute judgment. A contingent among them comprised master navigators, individuals whose deep understanding of celestial patterns allowed them to chart courses across vast, untamed waters. Still others were gifted diplomats, endowed with the eloquence and political acumen required to broker agreements with foreign monarchs and navigate complex international relations. Then there were those, merely courageous young men, whose spirits were ignited by the sheer prospect of adventure, captivated by the romantic ideal of venturing into the unknown alongside legendary figures. The epic journey itself commenced on an exceptionally tranquil dawn, as the expansive sea shimmered with a brilliance akin to countless crushed gemstones, and a gentle breeze swelled their sails with the compelling promise of discovery. The magnificent vessel, the Argo, glided through the aqueous expanse with the grace and precision of a finely honed blade, propelling its distinguished crew of heroes toward the fabled, distant shores of Colchis, where the coveted golden fleece awaited its rightful claimants. For the initial days, the voyage unfolded like a joyous festival, filled with the boundless energy of young men in the zenith of their lives, sailing confidently toward immortal glory beneath skies of unblemished azure. Yet the sea, an entity of unpredictable temperament, invariably finds ways to test even the most self-assured mariners. The Argonauts soon realized that their true tribulations would not merely involve reaching Colchis, but would encompass the entire arduous odyssey itself. They were confronted by tempestuous gales that severely challenged their seamanship, by enigmatic islands inhabited by bizarre and unfamiliar creatures, and by diverse peoples whose customs and tongues were utterly foreign to their experience. Each passing day invariably presented a fresh array of conundrums to unravel and novel proficiencies to acquire. One of their earliest and most formidable challenges presented itself when they were compelled to navigate the perilous passage of the Symplegades, the infamous clashing rocks that acted as a formidable guardian to the entrance of the Black Sea. These were colossal geological formations that would violently converge without any precursor, mercilessly crushing anything unfortunate enough to be trapped within their crushing embrace. Countless ships had tragically perished in attempts to traverse this strait, their sailors' skeletal remains now forming a ghastly carpet upon the seabed beneath the treacherous waterway. The ingenious solution to this deadly predicament emerged from meticulous observation and impeccably precise timing. The Argonauts dedicated several days to intently monitoring the rocks, assiduously studying their rhythmic movements, thereby learning to anticipate with accuracy when they would separate and when they would violently slam shut. When they finally embarked upon their audacious attempt, it demanded an unparalleled degree of synchronous coordination. Every single man strained at his oar in perfect, unwavering rhythm. Every sail was meticulously adjusted to capture the maximum possible wind, and the helmsman guided the vessel with split-second, unerring precision. Ukaku. They succeeded in their passage with a mere handful of inches to spare, the formidable rocks clashing shut immediately behind them with such proximity that they audibly scraped barnacles from the Argo's stern. But they had vanquished the first monumental trial of their expedition, and this hard-won success instilled within them a profound confidence that they possessed the collective fortitude to surmount any subsequent challenges that might lie ahead. They were no longer merely a disparate collection of individual heroes. They were progressively coalescing into an indomitable, unified team. The protracted months spent navigating the open sea imparted to them invaluable wisdom that no amount of terrestrial training could ever have furnished. They cultivated the crucial ability to collaborate effectively under intense pressure, to place unwavering trust in each other's specialized proficiencies, and to equitably distribute both responsibilities and hardships without fostering any trace of resentment. They came to understand that the essence of being a hero transcended mere individual strength or solitary acts of bravery. It encompassed the discerning judgment of knowing precisely when to assume leadership and when to defer, when to embrace calculated risks and when to exercise prudent caution. Furthermore, this arduous voyage served as a profound journey of self-discovery, removed from the familiar comforts and confines of their homelands, confronted with novel challenges that tested their very core in unprecedented ways. Each man unearthed latent capabilities and confronted personal limitations he had previously been unaware of possessing. Some individuals discovered an inner bravery far exceeding their own expectations. Others unearthed previously hidden talents for strategic leadership or subtle diplomacy. A select few realized that the personal glory they had initially pursued held less significance than the profound and enduring friendships they were forging in the crucible of shared adversity. Upon their eventual arrival at Colchis, the sight of the resplendent golden fleece suspended from its ancient tree within the hallowed grove, perpetually guarded by a dragon that knew no slumber, brought a stark realization. All their preceding maritime trials had been a deliberate preparation for this pivotal moment. The fleece itself was an object of breathtaking, indescribable beauty. Its wool possessed an ethereal quality, appearing to capture and perpetually retain the very essence of sunlight, shimmering with a vibrant radiance that imbued it with a palpable sense of vitality. Yet the arduous task of acquiring it would demand every ounce of collective wisdom and collaborative spirit they had painstakingly cultivated throughout their journey. The formidable king of Colchis imposed upon them a series of seemingly insurmountable tasks: the daunting feat of yoking fire-breathing bulls, the perilous act of sowing dragons' teeth that miraculously germinated into fully armed warriors, and the challenge of vanquishing mythical creatures that no single hero could possibly overcome in isolation. However, the Argonauts had, by this point, assimilated the profound lesson that impossible tasks frequently transformed into attainable objectives when approached with unwavering patience, cohesive teamwork, and inventive strategic thinking. They had also learned that, on occasion, the most crucial assistance materializes from wholly unexpected origins. In this particular instance, that invaluable aid emanated from Medea, the king's own daughter, who possessed an arcane knowledge of potent magic and efficacious herbs that proved absolutely indispensable to their ultimate triumph. Her crucial assistance, however, came with a significant stipulation. Jason pledged to marry her and to ensure her safe passage back to their homeland when they embarked upon their return voyage. This pact, though costly, ultimately enabled them to successfully complete their arduous quest and lay claim to the legendary Golden Fleece they had journeyed so far and endured so much to find. The homeward voyage presented a distinct contrast to their outward expedition. They now sailed as triumphant heroes, bearing their coveted prize. Yet, they were also markedly older and immeasurably wiser, their characters tempered and refined by months of shared hardships, profound discoveries, and collective growth. They had come to grasp that the authentic treasure was not the Golden Fleece itself, but rather the unbreakable bonds of camaraderie they had forged and the transformed individuals they had become, through the crucible of confronting daunting challenges together. Following their return, some of the Argonauts embarked upon renowned adventures of their own, their names subsequently etched into the annals of mythology. Others chose to return to lives of quietude within their native cities, finding profound contentment in having participated in an endeavor far grander and more significant than their individual existences. Nevertheless, all of them carried within their hearts the indelible knowledge that they had been integral members of a crew that had achieved something truly extraordinary. Not through isolated acts of individual heroics, but through the profound process of learning to place implicit trust in one another and to collaborate seamlessly toward the realization of a shared, monumental objective. And perhaps this encapsulates the most profound and enduring lesson imparted by the epic of Jason and the Argonauts. It suggests that the most truly meaningful adventures are invariably those undertaken in the company of others, and that the greatest treasures to be amassed are not material riches or mystical artifacts, but rather the profound relationships we cultivate and the personal growth we undergo throughout the journey. As our thoughts drift toward slumber, perhaps we might reflect upon the immense courage required not merely to embark upon such grand voyages, but also to willingly open ourselves to the transformative power of those experiences and to the profound influence of the individuals we encounter along the way. You know how Jason and his valiant crew learned that the most formidable challenges frequently serve as the most potent educators, imparting the most valuable lessons. Well, there exists another narrative that also revolves around the themes of challenges and learning. Though this particular tale is of an entirely different, far more somber complexion. This is the chronicle of Sisyphus, a monarch who foolishly believed himself to possess a cunning superior, even to that of the immortal gods themselves, and who, in turn, learned that some lessons are exacted at a price that endures for all eternity. Sisyphus reigned as the sovereign of Corinth, a city-state of considerable affluence and significant power, strategically positioned to command vital trade routes that spanned the ancient world. He was widely acclaimed throughout the Hellenic lands for his extraordinary intelligence and his unparalleled cunning, celebrated for his singular to unravel intricate problems that utterly confounded other rulers. and to extricate himself from predicaments that would have unequivocally brought about the ruin of lesser men. He harbored immense pride in these exceptional faculties, and it was perhaps this very pride that ultimately led him to the dangerous conviction that he could outwit anyone, including the omnipotent and immortal deities of Olympus. His troubles, which would ultimately lead to his eternal damnation, commenced with a progression of increasingly audacious acts of defiance directed against divine authority. He brazenly divulged sacred secrets of the gods to mortal beings, flagrantly transgressed the hallowed laws of hospitality, and engaged in acts of profound trickery that unequivocally crossed the fine line from mere cleverness into outright, dangerous hubris. Each successive instance wherein he managed to evade the inevitable consequences through some novel stratagem or ingenious manipulation served only to bolster his already formidable confidence in his own intellectual prowess. The ultimate transgression, the final unbearable affront, occurred when Thanatos, death personified, arrived personally to claim his soul. With astonishing ingenuity, Sisyphus managed to ensnare death itself, tricking the Grim Reaper into donning a pair of enchanted handcuffs that rendered him utterly incapable of performing his essential function. For a period, no mortal being across the entire world could perish, an outcome that initially appeared to be a miraculous blessing until humanity gradually began to comprehend the catastrophic problems this unnatural state engendered. The aged could not find their much-desired peace. The grievously wounded were unable to escape their excruciating pain, and the fundamental, immutable order of life and death was utterly disrupted. The Olympian gods were compelled to intervene directly to re-establish the natural cosmic balance, thereby freeing death and ensuring that Sisyphus would, at long last, be held accountable for his numerous and egregious transgressions. Yet, even within the confines of the underworld, Sisyphus's inveterate scheming persisted unabated. He cunningly persuaded his wife to neglect the customary rituals for a proper burial, subsequently exploiting this very omission as a pretext to petition for permission to return to the realm of the living to rectify the perceived oversight. Once he had successfully navigated his way back to the mortal world, he, predictably, simply refused to return to the netherworld. It required a prolonged and arduous effort, spanning several years, for the gods to finally recapture him and forcibly drag him back to the underworld, where they collectively resolved that any conventional form of punishment would prove woefully inadequate for an individual so persistently clever and defiantly rebellious. Sisyphus, they concluded, required a retribution that would endure for all eternity, and that would specifically address his unique combination of acute intelligence, overweening pride, and unyielding determination. Still, the punishment they meticulously devised was elegantly simplistic in its conception and absolutely terrible in its execution. Sisyphus was condemned to spend an eternity engaged in the ceaseless, grueling labor of pushing an enormous, ponderous boulder up the steep incline of a mountain. Every single day, he would strain and struggle with every fiber of his being to roll the colossal stone to the very summit. And every single night, just as he neared the apex, the relentless force of gravity would cause the boulder to inevitably roll back down to the very bottom, thereby compelling him to recommence the identical, futile effort anew with the arrival of each succeeding morning. It was a task that was simultaneously impossible to complete and yet eternally necessary to perform. an endeavor that was both utterly meaningful in its torment and completely meaningless in its outcome. What renders this particular punishment so profoundly fascinating is the exquisite precision with which it mirrored the very nature of his transgressions. Sisyphus had spent his entire mortal existence employing his formidable intelligence to circumvent consequences, to discover effortless shortcuts, and to accrue rewards without ever having to pay the appropriate, rightful price. Now he found himself irrevocably trapped within a predicament where his celebrated intelligence offered him no succor, where the concept of shortcuts simply did not exist, and where the sole reward for each day's monumental exertion was the absolute, unyielding certainty of being forced to repeat the identical Sisyphean effort on the morrow. At the outset, Sisyphus confronted his endless and arduous undertaking with the very same self-assurance and intellectual acuity that had consistently served him throughout his mortal existence. He meticulously scrutinized the colossal boulder, seeking any inherent weakness or structural anomaly that might render it lighter or more amenable to manipulation. Simultaneously, his gaze swept over the formidable mountain, his mind actively charting a superior ascent path or devising a mechanism to thwart the stone's inevitable descent. He experimented with a multitude of techniques, an array of differing strategies, and various innovative approaches, firmly convinced that his formidable intellect would, in due course, yield a definitive resolution to his plight. However, as the relentless passage of days seamlessly transitioned into months, and those months inexorably accumulated into years, Sisyphus slowly but profoundly began to grasp the true, unyielding essence of his predicament. This was not merely a complex conundrum awaiting a clever solution, but rather an immutable condition that demanded stoic endurance. The immense rock would forever retain its crushing weight. The mountain's incline would always remain impossibly steep, and the stone would perpetually tumble back to the base. No measure of human ingenuity or cunning could ever alter these immutable, fundamental realities of his eternal sentence. This stark and crushing realization could very well have plunged him into the deepest abyss of despair, and for a period, it is plausible that it did. There must have been prolonged, desolate stretches when the sheer, overwhelming futility of his situation seemed utterly insupportable, when the monotonous, ceaseless repetition felt less like a task and more like an encroaching form of madness. Yet, remarkably, a fascinating transformation began to unfold. As the centuries slowly drifted by, Sisyphus commenced a profound reevaluation of his relationship with the very act of his punishment. He relinquished the incessant struggle to solve the problem and instead began to immerse himself in the sheer, unadulterated experience of it. He started to discern nuances and details he had utterly overlooked before. The rough, cool texture of the stone against his calloused hands, the subtle yet profound ways his sinews and muscles adapted and strengthened with each Herculean effort, the delicate shifts in atmospheric conditions and the play of light as he pursued his daily, grinding pilgrimage up the mountainside. He cultivated a nascent appreciation for the elemental rhythm of physical exertion, finding a strange solace in the honest, direct correlation between diligent work and its immediate, if temporary, physical outcome. Certain philosophical thinkers have advanced the notion that Sisyphus ultimately discovered a peculiar form of inner tranquility amidst his perpetual toil. They posit that he cultivated a deep sense of satisfaction in the very process of the labor itself, rather than fixating on the impossibility of its completion. After all, his was an endeavor that inherently demanded immense physical strength, unwavering determination, and relentless persistence. He became utterly absorbed in his assigned task, completely immersed and present in each strenuous moment of effort, thereby liberating himself from the myriad distractions and pervasive anxieties that so often afflict those whose gaze is perpetually fixed on ephemeral future rewards. There is an almost meditative quality inherent in the poignant image of Sisyphus and his colossal boulder. It is an image that resonates deeply with our own everyday struggles against tasks that frequently appear endless and at times utterly devoid of meaning. Each of us, in our own way, has our individual stones to propel, our personal mountains to conquer, our own particular work that must be performed repeatedly, day after day. The fundamental inquiry is not whether we can somehow circumvent these cyclical obligations, but rather how we consciously choose to engage with them. Sisyphus, through his prolonged ordeal, eventually learned that profound meaning does not exclusively arise from the successful completion of tasks, but often from the meticulous and resolute manner in which we carry them out. Genuine pride and deep satisfaction do not always necessitate external accolades or the acquisition of permanent achievements. Sometimes they emanate purely from the simple, unadorned act of diligently performing what needs to be done, day in and day out, with a blend of skill, unwavering determination, and profound acceptance. And perhaps, within this ancient narrative, lies an even more profound lesson concerning the very fabric of life itself. A significant portion of our existence is inherently repetitive. We awaken, we labor, we nourish ourselves, we rest, and then we commence the cycle anew the following dawn. We construct edifices that are ultimately destined to decay, forge bonds that will eventually dissolve, and accumulate knowledge that will, in time, inevitably fade into obscurity. The pivotal question then becomes whether we can unearth genuine meaning and profound satisfaction within the ongoing process, rather than perpetually demanding only permanent, tangible results. As we perhaps drift into slumber, contemplating Sisyphus and his eternal boulder, we might find ourselves appreciating both the inherent tragedy and the peculiar, unexpected triumph embedded within his enduring saga. He was initially condemned for believing his cunning surpassed that of the Olympian deities. Yet, in the arduous process of learning to accept his irrevocable punishment, he may have unearthed a profound, quiet wisdom that had eluded him entirely during his earthly existence. The profound understanding that the labor itself can be its own intrinsic recompense, and that there resides an undeniable dignity in unwavering persistence, even when the task appears to stretch into infinity. Sisyphus, as we have seen, ultimately grasped that some of life's most indispensable insights emerge from the acceptance of those circumstances beyond our control. In a parallel vein, another compelling narrative of profound acceptance and hard-won wisdom unfolds. Though this one is set within the hallowed confines of a temple where individuals journeyed from every corner of the ancient world, seeking answers to the pressing questions that haunted their waking hours and disturbed their repose. This is the captivating account of Delphi, a sacred site where the mighty god Apollo communicated through the earthly vessel of a mortal woman, and where, paradoxically, moments of profound silence frequently conveyed more substance and insight than any spoken utterance. Delphi was majestically situated on the rugged, inspiring slopes of Mount Parnassus, nestled within a landscape that appeared to have been meticulously sculpted by the gods themselves, to evoke both profound awe and deep contemplative thought. The intricate temple complex seemed to cling precariously to the mountainside, much like a bird's meticulously constructed nest, enveloped by ancient olive groves and the ceaseless murmur of natural springs that bubbled forth from the deep, mysterious recesses of the earth. It was a place where the veil separating the mortal realm from the divine cosmos seemed remarkably thin, a unique nexus where ordinary individuals could genuinely perceive the palpable presence of an entity far grander and more potent than themselves. The Oracle of Delphi was invariably a woman, carefully selected for her innate capacity to receive and accurately interpret the enigmatic visions that Apollo bestowed upon her. She bore the revered title of Pythia, a name derived from Python, the colossal serpent that Apollo had vanquished to claim the sacred site for his own temple. The distinguished role of Pythia was simultaneously an immense honor and an immense burden. She was held in profound reverence across the entirety of the Greek world. Yet the immense responsibility of serving as the direct voice of a god was assuredly not a charge any mortal being could treat with levity. Pilgrims converged upon Delphi from every distant reach of the Mediterranean world, undertaking arduous journeys that often spanned weeks or even months to reach the revered sanctuary. They arrived burdened with profound questions that had troubled their minds for years: whether to embark upon a perilous war, whom to choose as a life partner, how to alleviate the scourge of a devastating plague, or where to strategically establish a new colony. These were not mere casual inquiries, but rather desperate, heartfelt pleas for divine guidance on momentous decisions that held the power to irrevocably shape entire lifetimes, or determine the very destinies of whole cities and civilizations. The intricate process of consultation itself was both elaborate in its execution and deeply solemn in its atmosphere. Prospective visitors were first required to ritually purify themselves in the sacred springs, then present appropriate and generous offerings to the revered god, and finally, patiently await their turn according to stringent protocols that often extended for days or even weeks. This period of intense anticipation was an integral component of the overall experience. It afforded them ample time to reflect profoundly upon their urgent questions, to thoughtfully consider whether they truly desired to know the answers, and to spiritually and mentally prepare themselves for whatever profound wisdom or formidable challenge Apollo might choose to impart. When their long-awaited turn finally arrived, the suppliants would be permitted to enter the inner sanctum of the temple, a deeply secluded chamber within the very heart of the edifice, where access was strictly forbidden to all but a privileged few mortals. There, seated upon a three-legged tripod positioned directly over a natural fissure in the earth, from which mysterious, ethereal vapors were said to rise, the Pythia would gradually enter into a profound, trance-like state and commence to articulate the enigmatic words that the god Apollo imbued within her. But it is precisely at this juncture that the narrative acquires a particular fascination for those among us who possess an appreciation for the intricate subtleties of human and divine communication. The Pythia's pronouncements frequently emerged as cryptic fragments, profoundly mysterious phrases, or highly symbolic images that demanded meticulous and discerning interpretation. The dedicated priests of Apollo served as crucial intermediaries, carefully attending to her ethereal utterances, and then translating them into the more formal, structured responses that visitors would ultimately carry back to their homes. These famed oracular responses were renowned throughout the ancient world for their inherent ambiguity. When the wealthy King Croesus, for instance, sought counsel on whether he should launch an attack against Persia, the oracle famously declared that if he were to cross the river separating the two kingdoms, he would undoubtedly destroy a great empire. Croesus, in his hubris, confidently assumed this prophecy referred to the destruction of the mighty Persian Empire. However, when he was decisively defeated in battle, he tragically realized that the great empire annihilated was, in fact, his own. The oracle had indeed spoken an undeniable truth, but it was a truth deliberately crafted to be understood in more than one profoundly impactful way. This inherent ambiguity was never perceived as a defect or flaw within the sophisticated oracular system. On the contrary, it was a deliberate and integral feature. The responses emanating from Delphi were meticulously designed to compel individuals to engage in deeper introspection regarding their pressing questions and their underlying assumptions. They effectively obliged visitors to meticulously consider a multitude of potential outcomes, to critically examine their own motivations and preconceptions, and to mentally prepare themselves for eventualities they had not initially contemplated. The oracle, therefore, did not merely dispense straightforward answers. It fundamentally provided a refined framework for formulating superior, more insightful questions. Yet, perhaps the most profoundly impactful of all oracular responses were those conveyed through absolute silence. Occasionally, despite the meticulous adherence to all the elaborate rituals and extensive preparations, despite the arduous, prolonged journey and the generous offerings presented, the Pythia would simply remain quietly seated upon her tripod, uttering not a single sound. This profound silence was never interpreted as a failure or as an indication of Apollo's absence. Rather, it was regarded as a particularly potent form of divine communication, one especially worthy of deep and sustained contemplation. What then could such a profound silence signify as a direct answer to a desperate inquiry? At times, it implied that the question itself was inappropriate or ill-conceived, perhaps suggesting that the inquirer was attempting to evade personal responsibility for a crucial decision that rightfully belonged to them alone. On other occasions, it might have indicated that the timing was not yet propitious, that additional life experience or greater personal wisdom was required before any answer could be truly meaningful or effectively utilized. Sometimes, it simply underscored that the very act of undertaking the arduous pilgrimage and articulating the question was, in itself, of greater inherent importance than the reception of any specific verbalized response. The visitors who departed Delphi having received only silence, as their answer frequently found this experience to be far more challenging, and ultimately far more valuable than those who were granted clear, explicit prophecies. They were compelled to return to their homes with nothing but the lingering echo of their own unanswered questions, forced to confront and live with pervasive uncertainty, and to forge their own unique paths forward. Many subsequently reported that this initial, unsettling silence gradually transformed into a form of answer in its own right, imparting a profound teaching about the inherent limits of human knowledge and the paramount importance of cultivating a deep wellspring of inner wisdom. The venerable priests of Delphi keenly perceived that individuals approached their hallowed sanctuary, yearning for certitude in a world perpetually shrouded in doubt, seeking inviolable assurances concerning the future that no entity, not even the pantheon of gods, could possibly bestow. Consequently, the enigmatic oracular pronouncements, whether articulated verbally or conveyed through profound silence, were meticulously crafted to assist sojourners in cultivating a distinct relationship with the inherent uncertainties of existence, not to eradicate them outright, but rather to instill the fortitude required to navigate life's path with unwavering courage despite their omnipresence. There resides a profound sense of solace in conjuring an image of the daily rhythms of Delphi throughout its many centuries of continuous operation. Each dawn, the consecrated priests would diligently execute the intricate rituals essential for preserving the sanctity of the sacred precinct. The Pythia, the chosen conduit, would meticulously prepare herself through an earnest regimen of prayer and spiritual purification. Meanwhile, visitors would gradually assemble in the expansive courtyard, where they would openly share their most cherished hopes and deepest anxieties with fellow pilgrims who had journeyed from distant and diverse lands. The entire assembled community was bound by the shared understanding that certain inquiries possess a gravity too immense to permit swift or facile resolutions. The revered oracle at Delphi remained active for more than a millennium, dispensing invaluable counsel to both private citizens and entire city-states across the span of the classical era. Its far-reaching influence extended considerably beyond the confines of religious observance, permeating the spheres of politics, philosophical discourse, and the minutiae of daily existence. The profound maxim, "Know thyself," was prominently etched upon the very walls of the temple, serving as a perpetual admonition to every visitor that the most crucial form of wisdom commences with an unflinching and honest process of self-examination. Eventually, as the ancient world underwent significant transformations and novel religious doctrines began to emerge, a diminishing number of individuals undertook the arduous pilgrimage to Delphi. The final documented oracular response was reportedly delivered in the 4th century CE. Following this epical event, the sacred temple descended into a profound quietude. This was not the resonant, meaningful silence indicative of a divine revelation, but rather the desolate, empty stillness of abandonment. The age when deities communicated directly with mortal beings through their specially chosen intermediaries was drawing to a definitive close. Nevertheless, the enduring precepts imparted by Delphi retain their pertinence for anyone who has ever grappled with arduous decisions or yearned for more explicit direction concerning their future trajectory. The oracle sagaciously taught that authentic wisdom springs not from possessing all conceivable answers, but from cultivating the ability to pose superior, more incisive questions. It posited that uncertainty should not be perceived as an intractable problem demanding resolution, but rather as an intrinsic condition of existence to be embraced with both courage and profound humility. And perhaps most significantly, Delphi powerfully demonstrated that on occasion, the most profound and illuminating answers manifest not as uttered words, but as an encompassing silence. These are the sacred spaces where we can attune ourselves to the quiet murmurings of our own intrinsic wisdom, locales where we may cultivate the self-trust necessary to undertake difficult choices without the elusive comfort of perfect foresight regarding their ultimate consequences. As we gently transition toward the embrace of slumber, Perhaps we can truly appreciate the intrinsic value of those tranquil interludes when we cease our relentless questioning and simply hearken to that innate understanding already residing deep within our hearts, guiding us toward what truly needs to be accomplished. It is often recounted how the oracle at Delphi illuminated the truth that sometimes the most profound insights are gleaned from accepting the immutable aspects of existence that lie beyond our comprehension or control. In a parallel vein, there exists another compelling narrative that speaks to the theme of acceptance and the inherent limitations of human prowess, even when that strength surpasses anything a mortal has ever evinced. This is the epic chronicle of Heracles, arguably the mightiest man who ever walked the earth, and how he came to understand that certain burdens simply cannot be lifted, irrespective of one's colossal power. Heracles was born endowed with extraordinary capabilities that initially appeared to be unmitigated blessings, yet they ultimately proved to be as much a formidable curse as they were a boon. His physical might was, in every sense, literally superhuman. As a mere infant, he famously throttled venomous serpents with his bare, tiny hands. In his burgeoning youth, he possessed the capacity to dislodge massive boulders that would typically necessitate the combined efforts of multiple teams of oxen to even nudge. However, this immense strength was inextricably linked to a temperamental disposition of equally formidable intensity. This volatile combination would, in due course, inexorably lead to an unspeakable tragedy. The catastrophic event that irrevocably altered the course of his life occurred during an episode of divinely induced madness orchestrated by Hera, who had never forgiven Zeus for his illicit affair with Heracles' mortal mother. During this temporary state of derangement, Heracles, in a horrific act, took the lives of his own wife and children, the very individuals he cherished most dearly in the entire world. When the veil of madness eventually lifted and the horrifying reality of his deeds descended upon him, the ensuing grief was so overwhelming that it very nearly consumed him entirely. Desperate to discover some means of expiating his grievous actions, Heracles sought the sagacious guidance of the oracle at Delphi. The Pythia delivered a solemn pronouncement, informing him that he was obligated to serve his cousin Eurystheus, the craven king of Tyrants, for a period of 12 years, and to diligently perform whatever arduous labors Eurystheus chose to impose upon him. It was only by conscientiously fulfilling this severe penance, she declared, that he could ever hope to purge himself of the corrosive guilt that was relentlessly gnawing at him from within. Eurystheus, acutely aware of Heracles' prodigious strength and harboring a deep-seated apprehension that his exceptionally powerful cousin might eventually challenge him for the royal throne, cunningly resolved to assign tasks that would be utterly impossible for any ordinary mortal to complete. He secretly harbored the hope that Heracles would perish in the attempt, thereby neatly resolving the political quandary while simultaneously appearing to offer a legitimate path to redemption. What Eurystheus failed to grasp, however, was that Heracles' profound drive to atone for his heinous sins was a force even more potent and unyielding than his legendary physical power. The initial labor presented to him appeared deceptively straightforward: to slay the fearsome Nemean lion, a monstrous beast that had been relentlessly terrorizing the pastoral countryside surrounding the ancient city of Nemea. Lions were, of course, inherently perilous creatures, but Heracles had certainly confronted dangerous animals before. What he astonishingly discovered, however, when he eventually tracked the formidable beast to its hidden lair, was that this was no mere ordinary lion. Its hide was utterly impervious to all manner of weaponry. Its formidable claws possessed the ability to effortlessly cleave through the most robust armor, and its earth-shattering roar could instantly paralyze even the most seasoned grown men with an overwhelming terror. Heracles, through a succession of agonizing trials and errors, painfully discerned that conventional weaponry proved utterly useless against the formidable creature. His arrows merely ricocheted harmlessly off its impenetrable hide. His mightiest sword could not even graze its resilient skin. His spear shattered into fragments upon impact with its unyielding skull. Yet Heracles possessed something far more invaluable than mere weapons. He harbored a profound patience, born of sheer desperation, coupled with an intrinsic willingness to adapt his strategy when the most obvious and conventional methods demonstrably failed. Eventually, he came to the stark realization that if he could not inflict harm upon the lion with external implements, he would be compelled to employ his bare hands and his unparalleled physical strength. He engaged in a ferocious grapple with the beast within the confines of its own cavernous den, utilizing his immensely powerful arms to slowly but inexorably choke the very life out of it in a brutal struggle that endured for countless hours. When the creature finally lay lifeless, he ingeniously employed the lion's own razor-sharp claws to meticulously skin it, fashioning for himself an impervious cloak that would afford him vital protection in the numerous labors yet to come. Upon Heracles' triumphant return to Tiryns, bearing the enormous carcass of the Nemean lion, Eurystheus was so consumed by terror that he immediately sought refuge by hiding himself within a large bronze jar, subsequently issuing all future commands from behind the perceived safety and impenetrable walls of his palace. Yet, far from being disheartened by Heracles' initial success, the cowardly king only grew more resolute in his grim determination to devise tasks that would, at last, prove insurmountable for his seemingly indestructible cousin. The subsequent 12 labors that followed were each meticulously conceived to exploit a distinct and unique form of impossibility. Some, such as the daunting task of slaying the 9-headed Lernaean Hydra, a monstrous serpent whose heads regenerated twofold for everyone that was severed, demanded sophisticated problem-solving acumen as much as sheer physical might. Others, like the gargantuan undertaking of cleansing the Augean stables, which housed thousands of cattle and had remained uncleaned for many decades, were simply too colossal in their scale for any single individual to accomplish within the prescribed time frame. Nevertheless, Heracles approached each seemingly impossible task with the same unwavering methodical determination that had enabled him to vanquish the Nemean lion. When brute force alone proved insufficient, he judiciously employed his keen intelligence. When intelligence alone was not enough, he resourcefully sought assistance from others. When the magnitude of a task appeared too vast for one person, he ingeniously discovered innovative ways to modify the scale of his approach, such as famously diverting entire rivers to flush out the Augean stables in the astonishing span of a single day. Each successive labor imparted upon him fresh insights into the fundamental character of insurmountable problems. Some challenges, he learned, could not be overcome through direct confrontation, but instead necessitated indirect and circuitous approaches. Certain tasks could not be completed in isolation, but demanded collaborative effort with others who possessed complementary skills and expertise. Still others could not be brought to a swift conclusion, instead requiring immense patience and unyielding persistence over protracted periods. Intriguingly, the most profoundly challenging labors were not necessarily those that demanded the greatest display of physical strength. Capturing the Cyrenaean hind, a sacred deer consecrated to the goddess Artemis, for instance, required him to meticulously track the elusive animal for an entire year without inflicting any harm upon it. This particular endeavor instilled in him a newfound patience and a deep reverence for the divine, intrinsic qualities that his immense strength had never previously compelled him to cultivate. Retrieving the fabled golden apples from the mythical garden of the Hesperides necessitated him temporarily assuming the colossal burden of supporting the heavens from the mighty Titan Atlas. For a brief yet profoundly significant period, Heracles quite literally bore the immense weight of the entire world upon his shoulders, thereby gaining a profound understanding of what it truly meant to shoulder responsibility, not merely for his own individual actions, but for the fundamental welfare and continued existence of all that comprised the cosmos. The ultimate labor, which involved bringing Cerberus, the fearsome three-headed guardian hound of the underworld, to the surface world, compelled him to embark on a perilous journey into the very realm of the dead and to squarely confront his own inherent mortality. In the oppressive darkness of Hades, encompassed by the spectral shades of those who had departed life, Heracles was forced to grapple with the stark reality that even his legendary strength would, in due course, inevitably wane and fail, and that even he, the mightiest of mortals, would one day join the countless spirits perpetually wandering in the eternal shadows. When the 12 arduous labors were at last brought to their completion, Heracles had undergone a profound metamorphosis, changing in ways that extended far beyond mere physical development. He had acquired a deep-seated humility through facing trials that had very nearly brought him to his knees. He had cultivated an enduring patience through years of systematic and relentless effort. He had learned the invaluable art of cooperation through the necessity of seeking assistance from both the gods and his fellow mortals. Most importantly, he had come to the profound realization that raw strength, when unaccompanied by wisdom, frequently proves to be a force more perilous than inherent weakness. Yet, perhaps the most profound revelation for the hero, Heracles, emerged from the stark realization that the arduous completion of his 12 labors did not, in fact, resolve the deeper, more agonizing internal conflict that had initially propelled him to undertake them. The crushing burden of guilt and the inconsolable sorrow stemming from the tragic demise of his family remained stubbornly present, undiminished even after his final monumental task was accomplished. His extraordinary achievements, though globally acclaimed, possessed no power to resurrect the lost or to annul the horrific acts committed during his descent into madness. What these demanding trials ultimately bestowed upon him was something far more subtle, yet infinitely more enduring. The profound understanding that true redemption is not found in a singular, magnificent feat, but rather in the persistent, conscious decision to deploy one's inherent talents and capabilities in the service of humanity, rather than solely for personal glorification. Heracles, the strongest man in the world, came to comprehend that such unparalleled physical might held little intrinsic value unless it was purposefully directed towards safeguarding those who, through no fault of their own, lacked the ability to protect themselves. Subsequent to the conclusion of his legendary labors, Heracles continued to embark upon numerous adventures and to confront a myriad of formidable challenges. However, his fundamental approach to these new trials had undergone a significant and discernible transformation. He exhibited a newfound readiness to solicit assistance when circumstances warranted it, displaying a greater reluctance to employ brute force when alternative, more diplomatic solutions seemed plausible, and demonstrating a markedly increased thoughtfulness regarding the potential repercussions of his every action. He had, through profound experience, assimilated the vital truth that genuine strength emanates not from one's capacity for destruction, but from the constructive ability to foster growth, to build enduring legacies, and to steadfastly protect the vulnerable. The enduring narrative of Heracles and his monumental labors serves as a powerful reminder to all of us that every individual, irrespective of their innate gifts or formidable influence, must ultimately forge their own path to coexist with the errors they have committed and the suffering they have inadvertently or intentionally caused. There exists no endeavor so grand, no task so Herculean, that its successful completion can unilaterally expunge the indelible marks of the past. No accomplishment, however awe-inspiring, possesses the power to silence the persistent, often accusatory, voice of one's own conscience. Nevertheless, Heracles' saga also contains a potent message of hope. It conveys the empowering insight that we possess the agency to choose how we confront our personal failings and inherent limitations. We can permit them to utterly devastate us, or we can embrace them as invaluable catalysts for profound learning and self-improvement. We can wield our guilt as a convenient pretext for inertia, or we can transmute it into a compelling motivation to transcend our former selves and aspire to greater virtues. As we gently surrender to the encroaching embrace of slumber, perhaps we can cultivate an appreciation for both the inherent burdens and the extraordinary gifts that define the human condition, a state characterized by inherent flaws and finite capabilities, yet simultaneously endowed with a boundless capacity for profound growth, continuous learning, and ultimate redemption, achievable through sustained, diligent effort and an authentic, empathetic concern for the welfare of others. You recall how Heracles, despite his unparalleled might, eventually grasped that even the greatest strength possesses its inherent boundaries, and that certain profound burdens are destined to be carried with quiet endurance rather than summarily cast aside. Well, there remains one more ancient tale to impart before we fully succumb to the currents of sleep. It is a narrative concerning the ultimate, immutable limits that govern the entirety of mortal existence, and of the three enigmatic sisters who, from the very dawn of time, meticulously measured out the unique duration of every human story. The Moirai, revered in the Hellenic world and known in Latin as the Fates, were beings of primordial antiquity, predating even the mighty Olympian gods, indeed, older than Zeus himself. Their existence commenced with the very genesis of creation, at that epochal moment when the ordered cosmos first differentiated itself from the formless void of chaos, and it was foreordained that they would persist, unwavering, until the absolute culmination of all things. Their individual names were Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, and collectively, they wielded dominion over a fundamental aspect of reality that even the most formidable deities could not circumvent or override, the finite span of every single mortal life. Clotho held the venerable title of the Spinner. She was perpetually seated at her ancient wheel within a mystical chamber, a realm that existed entirely beyond the conventional confines of linear time and spatial dimensions. With meticulous care, she drew out the nascent threads that would, in due course, become individual human lives. Each thread was utterly unique, a testament to the boundless diversity of existence. Some were woven thick and robust, suggesting inherent resilience. Others were exquisitely fine and delicate, hinting at fragility. Some shimmered with brilliant, vibrant hues, indicative of lives filled with passion and éclat, while others possessed more subdued, tranquil tones, foreshadowing quieter existences. The precise thickness, intricate texture, and specific coloration of each distinct thread would fundamentally predetermine the basic character, innate predispositions, and potential trajectory of the life it symbolically represented. Lachesis assumed the crucial role of the measurer. It was her solemn duty to receive the freshly spun threads from Clotho and, with an unerring hand, to ascertain their precise length, thereby dictating the exact duration of each life, the specific number of years that would be allocated to every individual. Some threads she extended to a considerable length, meticulously stretching them out to signify lives destined to span many decades, rich with experience. Others she deliberately kept short, marking lives that, though they might burn with an extraordinary intensity and brilliance, would inevitably conclude in a relatively brief period. Her pronouncements were absolute and irrevocable, impervious to any form of appeal or alteration. Atropos, the third sister, was known as the Cutter. When the preordained moment arrived for each individual life to reach its conclusion, she would purposefully take up her formidable shears and, with unwavering resolve, sever the thread, thus irrevocably separating the soul from its mortal coil. Her cuts were invariably clean and executed with absolute precision, performed without a trace of malevolence or the slightest hesitation. She possessed an intrinsic understanding that death was not a punitive measure, but rather an indispensable component of the grand, ceaseless cycle that perpetually created the necessary space for new life to emerge and flourish. The ethereal chamber where these three formidable sisters diligently performed their work was utterly unlike any other locale in the entire cosmos. It resonated with the soft, hypnotic hum of Clotho's spinning wheel, punctuated by the gentle, rhythmic murmur of Lachesis as she meticulously counted out her predetermined measures, and occasionally punctuated by the quiet, definitive snip of Atropos's shears. The walls of this extraordinary space were adorned with countless shelves, meticulously organized, holding an unimaginable multitude of threads, each in various stages of completion, some still being spun into existence, others already measured but awaiting their final severing, and still others already cut, neatly wound into compact, finished bundles. What truly rendered the Moirai so profoundly powerful, and indeed, so universally feared, even by the immortal gods themselves, was the irrefutable fact that their decrees applied to every single entity without exception. Kings and humble peasants, valiant heroes and cowering cowards, even the gods and mere mortals, all were unequivocally subject to the intricate threads that the sisters spun, measured, and ultimately cut. Zeus, the mighty sovereign of the sky, might command the very heavens, and Poseidon, the formidable ruler of the seas, might wield dominion over the ocean depths. But even these Olympian titans were utterly powerless to extend the life of a mortal whose thread had been definitively severed by Atropos. Tales circulated throughout the ancient world of legendary heroes who, in moments of profound desperation, attempted to negotiate with the fates, offering immense treasures or undertaking extraordinary feats of heroism in a desperate bid to secure longer lives for themselves or their cherished loved ones. Yet the Moirai remained utterly incorruptible. They steadfastly refused to accept any form of bribe, never exhibited favoritism towards any individual, and absolutely never made exceptions to their immutable laws. Their sacred work was deemed far too critically important to be swayed or influenced by personal entreaties or fervent emotional pleas. This unwavering inflexibility might, at first glance, cause them to appear cold or even cruel in the eyes of mortals. However, the ancient Greeks harbored a deeper understanding, perceiving that the fates' unyielding nature was, in essence, a profound manifestation of divine justice. Were the Moirai susceptible to bargaining or intimidation, then the wealthy and the powerful would undoubtedly live forever, while the impoverished and the weak would inevitably perish prematurely. The unchangeable, impartial character of fate thus ensured that every individual, regardless of their societal standing or influential connections, possessed an equal and inherent claim to the finite life they had been graciously granted. The fates, through their actions, also imparted a vital lesson concerning the fundamental distinction between the sheer duration of a life and its intrinsic value. A thread that was cut short was not, by any means, inherently less valuable or significant than one that had been measured to a great length. Indeed, some of the most profoundly meaningful and enduringly influential lives recounted in Greek mythology belonged to heroes whose threads, though bright with glory, were tragically brief. These were individuals who accomplished truly extraordinary deeds and left an indelible mark upon the world within the limited time they were allotted. What truly mattered then was not the mere length of the thread, but rather the quality and substance of what was intricately woven with it during the time it existed. Some individuals utilized their allotted years to cultivate beauty, to selflessly assist others, to diligently learn and grow, and to contribute meaningfully to the world surrounding them. Others, by stark contrast, squandered their precious time in acts of selfishness or wanton cruelty, or simply through a profound inattention to the sacred and precious nature of the gift they had been bestowed. Furthermore, the Moirai bore the immense responsibility for meticulously maintaining the delicate cosmic equilibrium between birth and death, a balance essential to prevent the world from becoming overpopulated with an unending procession of immortal beings. Each thread that was definitively severed by Atropos simultaneously created the necessary space for a new thread to be meticulously spun into existence by Clotho. Death, therefore, was not perceived as an absolute termination, but rather as a profound transformation, an indispensable component of the cyclical process that ensured life's continuous flow, its perpetual evolution, and its constant, vibrant renewal. Within their secluded chamber, existing beyond the temporal stream, the three sisters possessed the unique ability to discern the intricate patterns that individual lives collectively formed when intricately woven together. They comprehended, with absolute clarity, how each person's unique thread interconnected with countless others, how individual lives profoundly influenced, supported, and challenged one another in ways that the individuals themselves might never consciously perceive. From their elevated vantage point, they witnessed the majestic, sprawling tapestry of human experience being meticulously created, one precious thread at a time. Perhaps the most profoundly insightful aspect of the Moirai's monumental work was their inherent respect for the autonomous agency of the mortals, whose destinies they meticulously controlled. While they irrevocably determined when each life would commence and when it would ultimately conclude, they deliberately refrained from dictating precisely how that life would be lived in the intervening period. Within the predetermined span of years they allotted, each individual retained the profound freedom to make their own choices, to evolve and mature, and to forge meaning and purpose in accordance with their own deeply held values and personal aspirations. This fundamental principle implied that fate and free will were not diametrically opposed concepts, but rather harmonious partners in the grand design of existence. The fates, in their wisdom, provided the overarching framework, the immutable boundaries within which the vast spectrum of human choice could freely operate. This framework encompassed the basic circumstances of birth, the predetermined length of life, and the major, unavoidable events that would fundamentally shape each person's unique trajectory. Yet, crucially, within this established framework, there remained an expansive and profound scope for individual decision-making and the exercise of personal responsibility. The ancient Greeks derived a considerable sense of comfort and philosophical solace from this nuanced understanding of fate. It provided them with the profound realization that while they might not possess control over every single event that transpired in their lives, they unequivocally held dominion over how they chose to react and respond to those events. They could not select the predetermined length of their threads, but they could assuredly choose how they would utilize the precious time they had been granted. They could not evade the inevitability of death, but they could certainly strive to live in ways that would be cherished, remembered, and honored long after their individual threads had been finally severed. There is, indeed, something profoundly peaceful and reassuring in the contemplation of the Moirai engaged in their eternal sacred work, enveloped by the countless threads that symbolically represent the entirety of human experience. They are never hurried or fraught with anxiety, nor are they ever consumed by anger or driven by vindictiveness. They simply perform their essential duties, day after day, century after century, with the unwavering patience and meticulous care that such critically important work inherently demands. In certain ancient versions of their story, the three sisters would occasionally pause their ceaseless labor to closely examine a particularly intriguing thread or to quietly admire the intricate, evolving pattern that was gradually manifesting within the immense tapestry of human life. They derived deep satisfaction from their work, not because it granted them dominion or power over others, but precisely because it contributed to the creation of something infinitely larger, more intricate, and more exquisitely beautiful than any single individual life could ever hope to fashion alone. As the discourse draws to its conclusion, having traversed the ancient narratives, it is perhaps within the profound symbolism of the Moirai and their intricate threads that individuals may discover a unique serenity. One remains perpetually unaware of the ultimate length of their personal thread or the precise moment Atropos will wield her shears to sever it. Yet within this inherent uncertainty lies the profound power of choice regarding what one will meticulously weave with the allotted span of existence. It is within their capacity to fashion strands that fortify the surrounding tapestry, imbuing the collective pattern of human experience with enhanced beauty and profound significance. Each person possesses the agency to conduct their lives in a manner that duly honors the singular gift of consciousness and the accompanying freedom of choice bestowed upon their individual threads. Consequently, when the inevitable hour arrives for their threads to be cut, a deep trust can reside in the knowledge that their contributions have constituted an integral part of something far grander and more enduring than their singular selves. May a peaceful repose settle upon all, with the comforting understanding that each individual's unique thread contributes to a magnificent pattern, one of such vastness and intricate beauty that it eludes complete comprehension by any single observer. Nevertheless, this grand design absolutely relies on every distinct strand to uphold its inherent strength and to perpetuate its eternal, dynamic evolution. The dawn of a new day invariably ushers in fresh opportunities and renewed chances for individuals to meticulously weave something genuinely meaningful into the precious fabric of time they have been graciously granted. Therefore, a restorative rest is encouraged, allowing dreams to be gently permeated with the quiet, profound satisfaction derived from endeavors commendably completed, alongside the gentle, hopeful anticipation of future work yet to be undertaken.